O eternal and almighty God, from whom all power and wisdom come, we are assembled here before thee to frame such laws as may tend to the welfare and prosperity of our province. Grant, O merciful God, we pray thee, that we may desire only that which is in accordance with thy will, that we may seek it with wisdom and know it with certainty and accomplish it perfectly, for the glory and honor of thy name and for the welfare of all our people. We acknowledge we are gathered on Treaty 1 territory and that Manitoba is located on the treaty territories and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishin, Inuak, Dakota Oyate, Dene Sulene, and Nihi Thuwag nations. We acknowledge Manitoba is located on the homeland of the Red River Métis. We acknowledge northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. We respect the spirit and intent of treaties and treaty making and remain committed to working in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. Good afternoon, everybody. Please be seated. I am pleased to inform the Assembly that the Clerk of the Legislative Assembly has received from the Chief Electoral Officer a letter indicating the election of Abhi Khan as member for the constituency of Fort White. I hereby table the notice of the return of the member elected. On behalf of all honorable members, I wish to welcome you to the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba and to wish you well in your parliamentary career. Routine proceedings, introduction of bills. The Honourable Member for La Vérendrye.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move, seconded by the member for Swan River, the bill number 223, the Ukrainian Heritage Month Act, be now read a first time.
It has been moved by the Honourable Member for La Vérendrye, seconded by the Honourable Member for Swan River, that Bill number 223, the Ukrainian Heritage Month Act, be now read a first time. The Honourable Member for La Vérendrye.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am pleased to introduce Bill 223, the Ukrainian Heritage Month Act. The first Ukrainians came to Manitoba on September 7, 1891, and today Manitoba is home to 180,000 people of Ukrainian descent. They have contributed much to our economic, political, social, and cultural life in Manitoba. It is important to recognize and celebrate these contributions. This bill proclaims the month of September in each year to be known as Ukrainian Heritage Month. Thank you.
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. And in case I might have forgotten, routine proceedings has started with the introduction of bills, committee reports, tabling of reports, ministerial statements, the Honourable Minister for Sport, Culture and Heritage, and I would indicate that the 90 minutes notice prior to routine proceedings was provided in accordance with our Rule 26, Bracket 2. Would the Honourable Minister please proceed with his statement?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Waheguru ji ka khalsa, Waheguru ji ki fateh. I rise today to recognize and celebrate Sikh Heritage Month in Manitoba. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to our visitors, particularly members of our province's Sikh community who have joined us here in the House today. Manitoba has a long and proud history of honoring the Sikh community. The government of Manitoba was one of the first provinces to raise the Sikh flag, one of the first provinces to allow an exemption for motorcycle helmets, and in celebration of the 300th anniversary of the Khalsa, a tree was planted right here outside the Manitoba legislative grounds. April holds a historical significance for the Sikh community because it's when the Vaisakhi and Khalsa Day are celebrated by Sikh communities around the world. I, along with many of my colleagues, will be attending many Vaisakhi events. For centuries, Vaisakhi has been held in northern India. It is typically held on April 14 or 15 and marks the first day of the Sikh New Year. It was during Vaisakhi celebrations in 1699 that Guru Gobind Singh identified new practices for baptized Sikhs, a group known as the Khalsa. The designation of April as Sikh Heritage Month by both the Government of Canada and the Province of Manitoba is a testament to the important role this community plays in our national and provincial identity. Nearly 500,000 people, or 1.5% of the Canadian population, identify as Sikh. Whether as artists, business owners, educators, or community leaders, the Sikh community has helped diversify our culture and the Manitoba economy. Alongside the many accomplishments of the Sikh community, there are some everyday contributions that I'd like to acknowledge. A core value within the Sikh faith are seva, or self-service. An important aspect of this service includes volunteers who prepare and serve meals free of cost to visitors at gurdwaras, regardless of religion, ethnicity, economic status, or gender. Madam Speaker, when the COVID-19 pandemic caused most of the world to shut down, Manitoba's Sikh community rose to the occasion. Not only were many of the Sikh community kitchens in the gurdwaras able to sustain a safe seva practice, but they expanded their efforts to provide meals for frontline service workers. The strong commitment to the value of volunteerism mirrors the one held by many Manitobans. The volunteers lay a strong foundation by building community connections wherever they live, and the Sikh community has made many outstanding contributions to our provinces through many ways, including volunteerism. My colleagues and I are committed to continue to work with the Sikh community across this province as we come out of the pandemic. Whether it be attending gurdwaras, helping prepare langar, and most recently, issuing an official proclamation in recognition of Sikh Heritage Month, my colleagues and I are friends of the Sikh community. As we kick off Sikh Heritage Month in Manitoba, I wish you all peaceful and joyful times. As Vaisakhi is quickly approaching, I wish everyone a happy Vaisakhi. Thank you. Shukriya.
The Honourable Member for Burrows.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Madam Speaker, I'm honored to rise today to speak about Sikh Heritage Month. In 2019, our NDP team put forward Bill 228, the Sikh Heritage Month Act, with the support of Sikh Heritage Manitoba and it passed in Chamber proclaiming April as Sikh Heritage Month. The month of April recognizes and emphasizes the important contributions that the Sikh community has made and will continue to make to Manitoba's social, economic, political, and cultural heritage. At times of crisis, Sikhs are known to carry out public welfare services on humanitarian grounds. April is an important month for the Sikh community. This month, Sikhs around the world celebrate Vaisakhi, which marks the creation of the Khalsa and the Sikh articles of faith, such as turban. While we recognize the essential contributions that Sikh Manitobans have made, it is also important to acknowledge that Sikhs often face intolerance and prejudice. Turban-wearing Sikhs continue to experience racist and xenophobic acts of discrimination. Such acts are not a thing of the past. Just yesterday, a 70-year-old Sikh man in New York became the victim of a hate crime as he was brutally assaulted for wearing a turban. Madam Speaker, we must all raise our voices against acts of hateful violence and ensure that as legislators, we prioritize communities over partisanship. The rich Sikh history in Canada and Manitoba is very personal to me because it is also reflective of my own 12 years in Canada and my personal journey and experience. Lastly, I know that the month of April is also important for our Muslim and Hindu brothers and sisters. I would like to wish those celebrating Ramadan, Kareem, and a happy Navratri. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Tyndall Park.
Madam Speaker, I seek leave to respond to the Minister's statement.
Does the member have leave to respond to the ministerial statement? Leave has been granted. The Honourable Member for Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to rise and speak a little bit about why it is we celebrate Sikh Heritage Month in April. Madam Speaker, it is because of my father and many of my uncles like Gurtej, Pratam, and Parminder that I have had the opportunity to learn a little bit about Sikhism through visiting India, attending Gurdwaras, and getting to know people in the community, some of whom are here with us today in the chambers. And they've all taught me a little bit about Sikhism here in the province of Manitoba and our country. Sikh Heritage Month is an opportunity to reflect on the rich culture of our incredible Sikh community that continues to grow and prosper here in Manitoba. It is a time where people across Canada and members of the Sikh faith and others will be participating in Vaisakhi, a celebration highlighting Guru Gobind Singh, who laid down the foundation of Khalsa Panth. Madam Speaker, I want to share an issue that is held close to the hearts of many of my constituents in Tyndall Park regarding the Kamagada Meru incident. I've shared quite a bit about the Kamagada Meru here in these chambers over the years, but in short, this 1914 incident saw the government of the day turn away a Vancouver-landed ship carrying hundreds of South Asian migrants. The reason I bring it up is because the ship that was turned away and sent back to Calcutta was comprised in large of people of Sikh faith. Now, I have the honor of having a newer park in my constituency in the Waterford Green area, where residents of the houses nearby were promised a commemorative park in tribute to the Kamagada Meru. I am tabling an article of this from when the residents came here to the Legislature this past July. I table this in the hopes that the government will take the time to read the article and will commit to stepping up and assisting the city in making the park, a park that was promised to the community, a reality. Madam Speaker, with these few words, I want to wish everyone a happy Sikh Heritage Month and a happy Vaisakhi later this month. Thank you.
Further ministerial statement, the Honourable Minister of Mental Health and Community Wellness, and I would indicate that the required 90 minutes notice prior to routine proceedings was provided in accordance with Rule 26, Bracket 2. Would the Honourable Minister please proceed with her statement?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. April 1st, 2022 marked the 27th annual Takedown Tobacco National Day of Action. It is also known as Kick Butts Day, a day to highlight the problems caused by tobacco use in communities everywhere, and to urge elected officials to take action to protect youth from tobacco use. We encourage youth to reject deceptive marketing from the tobacco industry and live tobacco-free not only on the day, but every single day of the year. The youth are faced with a new threat, Madam Speaker, to their health, a harmful trend being sold as a way to relax and marketing itself as innocent fun called vaping. Vaping is putting a new generation at risk of nicotine addiction. Emerging research shows that vaping can lead to tobacco use. In order to reduce the number of smokers in our province, we cannot ignore the role vaping plays in creating them. In 2019, 21.5% of Manitoban youth in grades 7 to 12 reported vaping in the last 30 days, a 6% increase from 2017. Addressing youth vaping is a priority for our department. It was a key aspect of our recently launched 5-year roadmap, a pathway to mental health and community wellness, which calls for the development of a provincial tobacco and vape reduction strategy. This strategy's importance is without question. Smoking kills more than 2,000 Manitobans every year. Tobacco use remains the leading preventable cause of premature death worldwide. Research shows that smoking harms nearly every single organ of the body. It causes heart and lung disease and complicates the effective treatment of other health conditions. Quitting smoking can be very difficult, and I can attest to that with my own personal experience. By quitting, you can add years to your lifespan and increase your quality of life. If any smoker is ready to quit, help is available and accessible. Manitoba supports the Canadian Cancer Society Smokers Helpline, a free, confidential service offering support and information about quitting smoking or vaping by telephone, text, or online. The Canadian Cancer Society also operates Talk Tobacco in Manitoba, a free and confidential service for Indigenous people that offers culturally appropriate cessation support. I'm proud to share that in the spirit of Takedown Tobacco National Day of Action, my department launched a smoking cessation social impact bond on April 1st. Quit Smoking with Your Manitoba Pharmacist is a pharmacist-led intervention which delivers nicotine replacement therapy and counseling to individuals who wish to quit smoking. It was developed in collaboration with Pharmacists Manitoba and funded by Shoppers Drug Mart. In addition, Manitobans will soon be able to access the Tobacco Quit Card and counseling program, which offers accessible nicotine replacement therapy and cessation counseling to low-income individuals through their primary care provider. With over 200,000 smokers in Manitoba, multiple programs are required to support various populations to quit smoking. Manitoba's tobacco and vape reduction efforts are multifaceted and support broad population needs. Mental health and community wellness continues to work with key stakeholders such as the Manitoba Tobacco Reduction Alliance, the Manitoba Lung Association, Shared Health, and regional health authorities on efforts to prevent and end smoking and vaping in our province. In honor of Takedown Tobacco National Day of Action, I encourage all Manitobans to speak up on the harms of smoking, recognize the threat of vaping, and utilize cessation supports available in their communities to improve their health and well-being. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Point Douglas.
Miigwech, Madam Speaker. Today we recognize Takedown Tobacco Day and all the work that the advocates are doing to reduce smoking rates across our province and world. When we talk about quitting smoking, we often do so in ways that center on the individual smoker, implying that the decision to do so rests on them and them alone. But Takedown Tobacco Day reminds all of us that advertising and the effects of the tobacco industry have a major effect on the rates of dependency in our country. Smoking affects all of us, whether it's a friend or someone that we love, and it costs tens of millions of dollars to the healthcare system to treat smoking-related illnesses. We also note the rising rates of alternative forms of smoking, especially e-cigarettes, used among Manitoban youth. There is uncertainty about the long-term health impacts of the practice, and we know that vaping can lead to nicotine dependency. In 2020, 14% of Canadians between the age of 15 to 19 reported having vaped in the last 30 days. As we continue to advocate for more regulations of the tobacco industry, we also need to consider the pathways to addictions from all products. Over 20 years ago, I made the decision to quit, mainly because I wanted to be a role model to my 3 children, and I'm happy to say that none of them smoke. To all of the Manitobans trying to quit smoking, you can do it. We support your efforts, and to everyone who is thinking of quitting, don't forget that it's never too late to do so.
The honourable member for River Heights.
Madam Speaker, I ask leave to speak to the minister's statement.
Does the member have leave to respond to the ministerial statement? Leave has been granted. The honourable member for River Heights.
Madam Speaker, today is Takedown Tobacco Day, a day when we need to dedicate ourselves to reducing smoking and reducing vaping, particularly that using nicotine in our province. Let's look back for a moment. Manitoba took a major step forward in 2003 and 2004. This included the establishment of an all-party committee on environmental tobacco smoke. The committee found it was time to ban smoking in indoor public places. A bill to achieve this was passed June the 10th, 2004, and came into effect October 2004. The result of this has been a continuing decline in smoking in the years since then, and we thank all those who have helped in this effort to reduce smoking in our province. The most recent estimate of the rate of smoking in Manitoba was found to be 14.5% of Manitobans. Interestingly, the rate of smoking is lower in Manitoba than that in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia, even though the incidence of lung cancer is higher in Manitoba than in the other Western provinces. This means we should be looking not only at cigarettes, but also at other factors. As an example, the presence of radon gas in people's homes. Radon gas can cause lung cancer and can act together with smoking to significantly increase the rate of lung cancer. Manitoba has a higher proportion of homes with high radon levels than the other Western provinces. While the governments of Manitoba have focused for the last 20 years on smoking as the principal culprit in causing lung cancer, they've neglected the attention that is needed with respect to addressing the high radon levels in many Manitoba homes. Manitoba Liberals strongly support reducing smoking and vaping in Manitoba, particularly among our youth. We also believe it is critical to address and reduce the high levels of radon in far too many Manitoba homes. Thank you. Merci, miigwech.
Member statements. The honourable member for Fort White.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to start by acknowledging we are gathered on Treaty 1 territory, the lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Dakota, Ayote, Dene, Silene, and Nehituwuk nations, the ancestral lands of the Inuit and the homeland of the Red River Métis. Today, I rise for the first time as MLA for the people of Fort White to express my gratitude to them for placing their trust in me. I am humbled and honored to be their representative in this legislature. I promise to work hard every day to be a strong voice for my community, a positive leader, and an advocate for their priorities. Madam Speaker, and to my MLA colleagues, I'd like to say Assalamu alaikum. Translation, peace and blessings be upon you. It is a great honor for me to be the first Muslim in the history MLA in Manitoba. I am privileged to start my journey here today in these glorious halls with the great words of peace be upon you all. My hope is that this moment will stand out for the young, diverse children across this great province saying, I can do that as well. I matter, I am heard, and I am seen. Today we are making this Legislative Assembly a more inclusive, a more diverse, a more reflective tapestry of what we see all around us here in beautiful Manitoba and in our great country of Canada. Madam Speaker, I would not be here today if it was not for my family. To my mom, I love you. To my siblings, Hamera, Sohail, Amna, and Qasim, thank you. To my beautiful son, the love of my life, Sufyan Henry Ahmed Morris Khan, I love you to the moon and back, bud. Sorry, Madam Speaker, I asked for leave to continue.
The member has leave.
I know my father is looking down on me from above. Dad, you came to Canada with a dream to give your kids a better life and opportunity, and now we have that. Now I can take that dream forward and try to make it better for everyone else. Thank you, Dad, I love you. To all my families and my friends, my support system, my volunteers, my campaign team, and all the people of Fort White, thank you. Last, to my colleagues in the room, I look forward to working with you all. Whether you're on this side or the other side of the House, whether we agree or not, there will always be a respectful dialogue between you and I, moving Manitoba forward together. And that is why we are all here today. Thank you, Madam Speaker. May peace and blessings be upon you as well.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Madam Speaker, in 1990, Phil Fontaine did a CBC interview disclosing the abuse he suffered at Indian residential schools. It was a pivotal moment in Canadian history as it marked the first time a leader spoke publicly of the horrors occurring in these institutions. It certainly wouldn't be the last. That interview, alongside all the work of courageous survivors, led to the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the 94 calls to action, Canada's official apology, and ultimately to Friday's papal apology. Why was an apology from the Pope so important to so many survivors? It is because of the denial that is Canada's colonial history, the denial of our humanity as Indigenous peoples, the denial of the torture and trauma bestowed on the state and the church on the bodies of little children, including our little ones in unmarked graves, the denial of the intergenerational impacts of residential school, the denial of our languages, of our culture, and of our land. While an apology to some may not seem very important, to many survivors it is. Quite obviously, the best apology is one married to action. The Catholic Church is worth billions of dollars. Pay the $30 million owed to survivors now, not through fundraisers, but through the Church's own finances. 5 of us in this NDP caucus are the children and grandchildren of survivors. We are only here because they lived. And for that, we are forever grateful and in awe. Finally, a profound miigwech to my cousin, Phil Fontaine, and all survivors, including the member for Fort Rouge's father and uncle, and to all the matriarchs who led the delegations bringing forth this papal apology. Miigwech.
The Honourable Member for McPhillips.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to stand up and introduce Za Pizza Bistro Restaurant, which opened a new location at 2188 McPhillips. On March 19th of this year, I had the privilege to participate in the grand opening of the Pizza Bistro at their new location in McPhillips constituency. They opened its first location in Manitoba just in 2015 in the St. Vital area. Since then, they've opened 7 more franchises in different parts of the city of Winnipeg. Franchising this new small business highlights the importance of self-employment as part of the success of our local economy. It's a time we pay tribute to over 120,000 small businesses established in our province who employ over 72% of the Manitoba workforce. While the Pizza Bistro restaurant offers both dine-in and takeout options, they also provide catering to small and large events. Because this is a small independent restaurant with a strong focus on casual, welcoming atmosphere and a friendly service, they've created a sense of community with the constituents. And I quote, they noted in a recent conversation that guests are responding very well because they like the intimate, casual atmosphere, plus the small staff and open kitchen, help create a place where they feel welcome and at home. Small business owners love what they do, and they play an important role in supporting our local communities. The owners put a great deal of emphasis on relationship they're building with all their customers. They're taking the time and enjoying letting the community know that they're there to serve. Please help me in extending a sincere congratulations to the two women entrepreneurs, Maninder Kaur and Armajit Kaur Gill, on the grand opening of their second Zabista location. It is my hope that they and their families will be blessed with many years of success. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Notre Dame.
Madam Speaker, on Saturday, I received a bittersweet call from a constituent named Gray, an internationally educated nurse who has been working as a healthcare aide in a large Winnipeg personal care home for the past 8 years. Gray called to tell me that he finally got his registered nursing designation and would be working as an RN for a personal care home in Ontario. Instead of staying in Manitoba, where he's desperately needed, Gray will be working as a nurse at a personal care home in Kenora, Ontario. He chose Kenora because it's only 2 hours away from his home here in Winnipeg. Gray was a Manitoba Provincial nominee. He has strong family ties and wants to remain in Manitoba. Gray is just one of many internationally educated nurses that have been forced to leave the province in order to become licensed RNs. For the last 3 years in a row, Manitoba has ranked 8th out of 10 provinces for our poor ability to attract and retain immigrants. For the past 2 years, we've had alarming negative growth rates due to outmigration. And recent data from the Office of the Manitoba Fairness Commissioner shows that in a 4-year span, only 16% of internationally educated professionals got full accreditation and got to work in their field of study and experience. Even worse, only 5% of internationally educated nurses become fully registered here in Manitoba. But it doesn't have to be this way. Solutions have been laid at the feet of this government by its own IEN advisory group, but the PCs remain unwilling to act. Internationally educated nurses have not asked to make this process easier. They have only ever asked to make this process fair. I am also repeating my calls for the government to uphold existing labor mobility laws and allow nurses licensed in other provinces in good standing to work here in Manitoba. Removing unfair barriers is the first step.
The member's time has expired. The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Learning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On March 6th, I was honored to have the opportunity in my constituency to bring greetings on behalf of the province of Manitoba and welcome all the participants and fans to the 60th Annual Canadian Power Toboggan Championships, the greatest show on snow in Beausejour. Congratulations to Gunnar Stern from West Chicago, Illinois, on your victory, winning this year's 2022 Canadian Power Toboggan Championships. Every year, more than 100 racers of all ages and skill levels come from across North America to compete in the Canadian Power Toboggan Championships in Beausejour, Manitoba. The Canadian Power Toboggan Championships has the world's fastest and safest 1/2 mile ice oval track where up to 18 racers compete at the same time. The Canadian Power Toboggan Championships started in 1963, and it was the first formally organized snowmobile race in the sport's history. CPTC is a community-based nonprofit organization with more than 200 volunteers for the longest-running snowmobile race in the world. CPTC is recognized as the leading snowmobile racing event in Canada. I am pleased to highlight that since 2016, our government has provided over $133,000 in funding through the Community Places and Building Sustainable Communities grant to the CPTC organization. Thank you to Reed Baker, the president of the Canadian Power Toboggan Championships, and your board for all your hard work and dedication. I wish to extend my sincere congratulations to the racers, organizers, volunteers, and everyone involved. All the best for continued success in the future. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Although they have departed, I would like to acknowledge that we had guests in the Speaker's Gallery this afternoon, and they included family members of the Honourable Member for Fort White, and it included his mother, Rihanna Khan, his siblings, Humara, Rana, Sohail Khan, and Amna Mirza, and his son, Sufyan Moorish Khan, and his constituency assistant, Laurel Hammond. Also in the public gallery were family and friends of the Honourable Member for Fort White. And to all the other members that are in our gallery today, it is very nice to have everybody back here being able to join us as we conduct our assembly today, and it is very nice to have people in our gallery today. And on behalf of all of the members here in the Legislature, we want to welcome all of you to the Manitoba Legislative Assembly. Oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
I just want to add my appreciation and say that after two long years, it is very good to have people in the gallery once again. Along with those comments, I want to send my love to the residential school survivors who had a very meaningful week, along with all of us as Canadians. And of course, I want to say Sat Sri Akal to everyone celebrating and observing Sikh Heritage Month during this month of April. I want to take this opportunity also in response to my colleague from Fort White to say wa alaikum assalam. Significance of having a member of the Ummah join us here in the chamber is a milestone. And not only is it meaningful for young Muslim children, it's meaningful for all children, that they now can look to this place and say, of course, there should be a Muslim legislator in Manitoba's chamber. I do have a question about affordability, but I wanted to begin with those comments.
The Honourable First Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his comments. Certainly welcome everyone back to the Manitoba Legislature and those in the gallery as well, Madam Speaker. And to those from a Sikh community who were here today, I want to thank the Minister for his statement today, and we wish them all the best, and we thank them for being here. And obviously want to say that this was a big week, I think, for residential schools and those survivors, Madam Speaker, and certainly the apology by the Pope. We welcome that as well, Madam Speaker. I think that is a step forward, and certainly we recognize that. I also want to recognize our new MLA for Fort White to the Manitoba Chamber and to the Legislature for his first day, and as the first Muslim MLA, we welcome him here as well, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a supplementary question.
Well, on with the show then, Madam Speaker? Life is getting more and more expensive in Manitoba, and this government is doing nothing to help. We know that it costs more to fill up at the pump, it costs more to go to the grocery store, and yes, your hydro bills keep going up and up and up because of orders they've made at the cabinet table and legislation that they've passed right here in the chamber. Yep. Now with their new bill, they want to raise rates even more, 5% per year. The Premier has a choice to make. Will she simply stop raising hydro rates on Manitobans? Yes or no?
Yeah.
The Honourable First Minister.
Very much, Madam Speaker, and I certainly welcome any question from the Leader of the Opposition when it comes to affordability for Manitobans. We know that under the previous NDP government, they raised taxes almost 13 or 14 times. They raised taxes on the backs of Manitobans to make life less affordable for Manitobans, Madam Speaker. We have done many things to make life more affordable for Manitobans, Madam Speaker, and next week we will make life even more affordable for Manitobans.
The The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on the final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, it's pretty clear that Manitobans don't like this Premier's approach, and they don't like the approach of this government. And really, it's very understandable to see why. It was only our team who was able to stop them from raising hydro rates yet again here in the legislature. But did they stop and listen to Manitobans? Did they learn the lesson from that experience? No, Madam Speaker. They left over the past year, held a leadership race, and then came back to raise hydro rates through legislation once again. That's not making life more affordable. That's just repeating the mistakes of Brian Pallister. Will the Premier continue, or will she simply stop raising hydro rates today?
The Honourable First Minister.
Madam Speaker, I also welcome any question from the NDP Leader of the Opposition when it comes to Manitoba Hydro, Madam Speaker. Certainly under their watch, the NDP, Bipole 3 and Kiosk was $3.7 billion over budget. The Kiosk costed $2.2 billion over budget. Bipole 1.3 over budget. Madam Speaker, the NDP misled Manitobans on the escalating costs of these massive infrastructure programs, Madam Speaker, and now they've left Manitobans to clean up for their mess, Madam Speaker. We will continue to be on the side of Manitobans to make life more affordable for all of them.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a new question.
Madam Speaker, you know that Brian Pallister said in 2020 that Manitobans have to look after themselves. And then the Premier went and said the very same thing this year. You know what makes that so much more difficult? When the government stops publishing COVID data, Madam Speaker. And the reason why this decision makes no sense is because, one, it contradicts public health, but two, it's the people of Manitoba who pay for that data. The people of Manitoba pay for this COVID data. They should be able to have access to it. It shouldn't be hidden from them by this Premier and the PC government. Will the Premier reverse the decision to hide COVID data?
The Honourable First Minister.
Well, once again, Madam Speaker, I'll address the litany of false accusations by the Leader of the Opposition. As usual, Madam Speaker, he knows that these issues are reported weekly, as is the case in many other provinces. In fact, some provinces have moved to monthly reporting, so we are, in fact, ahead of them. But, Madam Speaker, we will continue to monitor the data through the wastewater system and also through other indicators. And Madam Speaker, we will continue to work with public health and other stakeholders in our healthcare system to ensure that we will take the appropriate steps to keep Manitobans safe.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a supplementary question.
Madam Speaker, careful observers will note that the Premier just referred to a form of data that is not shared publicly with Manitobans. This is something that has not been done throughout the pandemic, even though many experts have been calling for this information to be released to Manitobans. Again, the people of Manitoba pay for this information to be collected. They pay for this data to be tabulated. They even pay for the salaries of these government ministers who hide this information at the cabinet table. It's a simple ask. Let Manitobans see the data on COVID so that they can understand the situation as it pertains to public health. Will the Premier keep hiding COVID data, or will she reverse her position today?
The Honourable First Minister.
Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition can continue to put false accusations on the record in this chamber, Madam Speaker, but it doesn't make it any more true, Madam Speaker. The fact is that we do publish this data weekly, Madam Speaker, as do other provinces. Of course, what I have said, Madam Speaker, and what healthcare professionals have also said, Madam Speaker, is that we need to learn to live with COVID, Madam Speaker. And as we transition through this, Madam Speaker, we will ensure that we take every precautions to make sure that Manitobans are safe throughout this process.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, the challenge is that not everyone gets to live with COVID. We have lost more than 1,700 Manitobans through this pandemic. One of the tools that can help save lives is to arm Manitobans with the public information collected by public health. One of the mistakes that has been made by this government since the time of Brian Pallister and continuing to now is the concealment, the hiding of this data. We are simply asking for this government to stop. You can listen to the many public health experts speaking about this on the daily, saying that this government should publish this information. Will the Premier release this information daily and stop hiding the truth from Manitobans?
The Honourable First Minister.
Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is just wrong again. In fact, the very information that he is asking for is published on our website on a weekly basis, Madam Speaker, and that is available for all Manitobans, indeed for people all over the world to look at, Madam Speaker. Right. So that is hardly hiding from anything.
Yeah. The Honourable Member for Union Station.
Madam Speaker, hallway medicine is returning to Winnipeg hospitals. Manitoba's busiest emergency room had a 10-hour wait for care last month. That's the longest wait on record. We've been telling this minister and this government for years that their cuts are causing very real harm. There are some solutions, though. Return the hospital beds that this government cut and address unacceptably high nurse vacancy rates of over 20%. Will the minister commit to doing so today?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for Union Station for the question. The members opposite wrote the book on wait times, Madam Speaker, and left us to clean up the mess that they left behind. And I want to say that we appreciate the efforts and commitment of our talented healthcare staff and their dedication to providing compassionate patient care. It has been a difficult 2 years for Manitobans. Many individuals are showing up in our access points, which is our emergency departments, and I want them to know that we are working diligently to ensure the services are available to them.
The Honourable Member for Union Station on a supplementary question.
Madam Speaker, 10 hours for care at Manitoba's busiest emergency room is beyond unacceptable. I'll table the documents we received through FIPA. 10 hours to wait at HSC is the longest ever wait on record. Cuts and consolidation have done lasting damage, and we're seeing it at the emergency room at HSC. It's time to invest. It's time to replace the beds that this government cut. Why won't the minister address the 10-hour waits at HSC?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to assure Manitobans that our sickest patients that show up in our emergency departments, that we are providing quality, safe care. We know that less urgent patients, the levels are higher than we would like them to be, but we continue to work with our health system leadership to identify opportunities to increase medicine capacity. And there will be more news in the budget next week, Madam Speaker.
Order. The Honourable Member for Union Station on a final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, it's not just 10 hours at emergency rooms. Many Manitobans are still waiting for surgeries. We heard from Brenda Spearman, who's waiting for a spinal surgery she desperately needs. She's in extraordinary pain and has to wait until June for an MRI just to get the waiting process started. Her husband, Wayne, says she has zero quality of life. Brenda and her husband watched the surgical update hoping for answers, but were disappointed that the minister failed to set any target dates. Will the minister set targets for Manitobans waiting in pain? People like Brenda Spearman.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank the Diagnostic and Surgical Recovery Task Force for the incredible work they have been doing with the health system leadership since December when they were appointed. Perhaps the member for Union Station missed the update last week. Sanford Hospital in North Dakota has successfully operated on 9 patients. 1 patient was with us sharing her story. And I know that there are many Manitobans that are looking to the task force to alleviate their pain and suffering. And I want them to know that we are working very quickly to ensure they receive the care they need.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Notre Dame.
Madam Speaker, new funding for health support staff needs to be included in the upcoming budget. Health support staff have worked at the front lines of this pandemic. They showed up to work to keep us safe, and when the ones we love got sick, these staff were at the bedside. They've been without a contract for far too long, and they have been left out of pay top-ups. Will the minister recognize these staff and ensure they have a contract?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, the members opposite seem to know the answer to the question. They're already shouting it out. Indeed, we are not the employer, Madam Speaker. Shared Health is the employer. They laugh at Shared Health at the negotiation tactics, Madam Speaker. We depend on the collective bargaining process. We know they're working hard at the table, and we're looking forward to that outcome, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Notre Dame on a supplementary question.
Madam Speaker, health support workers like those in the Brandon emergency room took the same risk as other frontline workers, but were not shown the support they deserved. Thousands of workers in personal care homes worked in facilities with outbreaks to care for our loved ones. They are doing so without a renewed contract. In fact, they have not seen a raise in many years. It's time to show these workers the respect they deserve. Will the minister ensure COVID top-ups and a new contract in the upcoming budget?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, the member opposite is asking me to interfere in contract negotiations, Madam Speaker. I will not do that. Shared Health is the employer. They are negotiating in the collective bargaining process with the members that the opposite member refers to in the Brandon Regional Health Centre. They are negotiating with Shared Health. That's where those negotiations would take place, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Notre Dame on a final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, the minister needs to ensure that new funds are available for health support staff in this coming budget. Inflation is now over 5%. Many health support workers have had their wages frozen for years, and they've put themselves at risk working in our hospitals, in home care, and in personal care homes with patients infected with COVID. It's time for a fair deal for all health workers, and that includes health support staff. They deserve new contracts and top-ups that recognize their service on the front lines of this pandemic. Will the minister ensure that funding is in place in the upcoming budget?
Right on.
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We were very happy when Shared Health came to a collective agreement with the nurses, and we expect they will do the same with the support services that are out there, Madam Speaker. We thank everyone in healthcare that worked so hard throughout the pandemic and continues to do so. In terms of the budget, stay tuned. You'll hear next week.
The honourable member for St. John's.
Madam Speaker, the Premier believes that there's one set of rules for her and one set for everyone else in Manitoba. The conflict of interest law is clear. The Premier should recuse herself from any matters where her family has a financial interest. But we know she didn't do that when it comes to the Exchange Income Corporation. Now the Premier's election filings show that EIC executives and related lawyers donated over $43,000 to her leadership campaign. That's nearly 8% of her entire amount that she raised. Will the Premier admit that she is in a conflict when it comes to EIC?
Yeah.
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Well, Madam Speaker, here we go again. Here's what the NDP do best. A campaign of fear and slander against the Premier. Again, preambles, dishonest, obviously non-factual. Madam Speaker, I know the NDP is probably jealous. Probably jealous that we had so many fundraisers for the Premier's election campaign. That's probably what they're jealous about. There's nothing to see here, Madam Speaker. This is all above board, Madam Speaker. I know the NDP are jealous of the money that the Premier is able to raise during the campaign. I know they're jealous. They're going to keep going down this rabbit hole day after day.
The Honourable Member for St. John's on a supplementary question.
Over $43,000 was contributed to the Premier's leadership campaign by executives and related lawyers of one company, EIC. That's the company where the Premier's family has a direct financial interest in. And that's the company the Premier helped award a contract to. That's a conflict, Madam Speaker, and the Premier should recuse herself. Yep. The Premier needs to be clear with the House. Will she recuse herself from awarding any more contracts to EIC?
Yeah, why not?
Order. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Well, Madam Speaker, the NDP again making accusations without bringing anything to the table. I mean, this has been a history of the NDP, keep making accusations without bringing any facts to tie the information to the allegations. Madam Speaker, I know the NDP...
Order!
I know the NDP is upset that the Premier happens to have friends that may happen to have money and want to contribute to her campaign. Madam Speaker, this is about democracy in action. Madam Speaker, I don't know what the NDP has against democracy. This is democracy in action. And Madam Speaker, these were good Manitobans promoting and backing the Premier, Madam Speaker, backing the Premier in a fair and election campaign.
The member's time has expired. I'm having difficulty hearing when members are actually speaking in the House, so I'm going to ask for everybody's cooperation, please, so that I can hear what is being asked and answered. The Honourable Member for St. John's on a final supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's important for leaders in the highest positions to simply follow the rules. That's what the rest of us do here. We learned one company alone contributed 8% of all the money the Premier raised in her leadership. The Premier should step back from any dealings with that company. It's very simple, Madam Speaker. She should recuse herself. So it's a simple yes or no. Will the Premier follow the rules and recuse herself from any dealings with EIC?
Yeah.
Order. Order. I need to be able to hear the answer, please. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Well, Madam Speaker, again, false accusations coming to the table without any basis for those accusations, Madam Speaker. There is no conflict of interest here. What we have is Manitobans putting their money on the table, hardworking Manitobans supporting an individual for our leadership, for the Premier of Manitoba. Madam Speaker, if the opposition wants to continue on this witch hunt, they have nowhere further to look than across the aisle. Look in the mirror if they're after a witch hunt.
The honourable member for Flin Flon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The government of New Brunswick has raised their province's minimum wage by over $1 on Friday, and will raise it again later this year by another $1. Manitoba's minimum wage now sits a mere 14 cents from being the lowest minimum wage in Canada.
Shame on you.
People need a living wage, and they need it now. Why won't this government support a living wage?
The honourable order. The honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We took the politics out of the increasing the minimum wage, unlike the opposition who played politics all the time with this, Madam Speaker.
Order!
It's predictable, it's based on inflation, as opposed to the political situation and solutions that the opposite had. 0% in the first year they were elected, then twice increased it just before an election, Madam Speaker. We're making Manitoba more affordable, reducing taxes, taking away the broadening of the PST they did, reducing it by 1%. They wanted to increase taxes, and they'll continue to do so, Madam Speaker.
Honourable member for Flin Flon on a supplementary question.
Madam Speaker, the minister should be ashamed of that answer. He should be. Working families are worried about rapidly rising costs, including the cost of fuel at the pumps, food at the grocery stores. Manitoba families deserve better than second last in this country. We need a government that works for Manitoba families, not just the rich families. Will the minister make announcements about plans to raise the minimum wage and make it a living wage, and will he do that today?
The honourable Minister of Labour.
Well, the member strays into politics that they just love. They can't get away from trying to promise things to Manitobans. Well, here's a promise that the Leader of Opposition made. He wanted to shut down Maple Leaf, Madam Speaker. He led his party to shut down Maple Leaf during the pandemic, shut down all processing, throwing tens of thousands of people out of work, Madam Speaker. How does that help workers in Manitoba, Madam Speaker? It doesn't. And that's what we're faced with the NDP throwing people out of work.
I'm going to have to call the member for Point Douglas to order. There is an incredible amount of heckling, if not yelling, and I am just having difficulty hearing. So warning to everybody that I want to be able to hear, I have to be able to hear questions and answers. So please, the honourable member for Flin Flon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And once again, the minister should be ashamed of himself for standing up saying that he shouldn't protect workers during a COVID pandemic and try and tie that into the fact that this government is continuing to starve workers because they won't address their substandard minimum wage. The price of everything is going up. We see that every day. Price of food is up over 7.4%. The cost of fuel, more than 50 cents a litre, gone up. Manitoba's minimum wage is a national embarrassment, and this minister should be ashamed of himself. It needs to be raised to a living wage, and it needs to be raised immediately. Will the minister finally commit to doing so and raising the minimum wage to a living wage today?
The honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a predictable increase for Manitobans, for Manitoba businesses, Madam Speaker. We also reduced the minimum personal exemption, saving Manitobans hundreds of millions of dollars there, Madam Speaker, making sure that they had ability to live on their salaries, taking them off the tax roll. This is not the political solution that the opposition would call for. That's what they're looking for now. All politics all day. Perhaps the member opposite was part of the group discussion that wanted to raise the PSD not just once, but twice, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. After tens of thousands of cases and over 1,700 deaths in Manitoba, the PCs have effectively given up tracking the pandemic. The daily COVID dashboard has been wiped off the government website, and PCR tests are hard to come by. Jurisdictions around the world are facing a new wave, no different from the last one, an explosion of Omicron cases that put people in hospital, in ICU, and in an early grave. Hope is not a plan, and denial is not an explanation. Whose decision was it to take down that dashboard? What evidence is there to justify it when lives and workers are all at stake?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, we work closely with Public Health and all the advisors, Madam Speaker, on what information is made available to Manitobans. They're looking at what's happening in the rest of the provinces and the rest of the world, and we're making sure that Manitobans have information to make decisions on. It's published weekly, so the information is readily available. I know the member may not like it. He wants a doom and gloom, Madam Speaker, but we're working with Public Health to make sure Manitobans can make those decisions and get the information they need.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface on a supplementary question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I received a letter today from a concerned Manitoban about the being dark in the numbers. He said, quote, having or not having this information will, bottom line, determine the rate of COVID in the province and the number of people who die from it, end quote. Manitobans deserve to know whether the Premier, the Health Minister, and their advisors are doing their own research on the internet, or if they're just caving into peer pressure from other Conservatives. We want names because Manitobans deserve to know who is responsible so we can someday hold them to account for their negligence. Whose idea was it to shut this down? Who signed off on it, and what evidence was it based on?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, there were many questions and accusations there. There's so many, Madam Speaker, that are inaccurate that it's hard to discover which path the member opposite wants to go down, which conspiracy. So all I can say, Madam Speaker, is I'm so happy and thankful that Manitobans stepped up and got vaccinated. It was an exemplary, fastest, largest, most successful vaccination campaign in Manitoba history, ma'am. Enormous thank you to all the testing staff, the vaccinators, administrators, and volunteers that made it all work, Madam Speaker. This just didn't happen overnight. A lot of planning went into that to make it done and make it done well. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for River Heights.
Madam Speaker, Brenda Spearman is waiting for spinal surgery. She has a lot of pain. Her current quality of life is zero. She's aware she might be able to go to Sanford Health in Fargo, North Dakota for her surgery. However, she doesn't know if there is a list for people to go to North Dakota. She doesn't know if she's on that list or not. And if she's not on the list, she's not sure how she can get on the list. And if there is somewhere a decision that's been made that she's not to be on the list, she needs to know how to appeal that decision. I asked the Minister of Health, will she provide answers to these questions that Brenda and others have about the government's list for people to go to North Dakota for spinal surgery?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for River Heights for bringing forward this case. I do want to say that as a result of personal health information. I cannot discuss individual cases on the floor of the chamber. I invite the member to bring forward that case to my office. We would be happy to look into it. For individuals who are interested in Sanford Health as a hospital as an option for spine surgery, I encourage them to speak directly with their specialist about the program and to receive more information there.
The honourable member for Portage La Prairie.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With the spring melt starting up, Manitobans will soon rely on a series of water control structures to ensure that water levels remain within acceptable levels. Can the minister speak to these water control systems and explain the work he has been doing to prepare Manitoba for this spring season?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for such a great question. As the member from the Portage La Prairie since 2011 knows, I don't have to educate him about the Portage diversion. What I can say, recently I had a distinct pleasure of meeting with the Manitoba Transportation and Infrastructure staff on site of the Portage diversion and the Assiniboine control structure, who assisted in the operations of these provincial flood mitigation assets. Madam Speaker, throughout Manitoba, we have these dedicated team of professionals, and to them, thank you. Their busy season is just beginning, and Manitoba can rest assured knowing that these experts are there to watch over the control structures. Thanks to our dedicated team of transportation infrastructure staff, we are well equipped and prepared to handle any
expired. The honourable member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's springtime. Manitobans' minds have turned to visiting parks. But that is another thing that is getting more expensive for Manitobans. And yet, this government continues to use a company from Texas which doubled the cost for a simple day pass. $600,000 a year is being given to this private company. Can the minister please explain why they continue to hand over hundreds of thousands of dollars to a U.S. company instead of investing it in our parks?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Climate and Parks.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and certainly thank the member from Wolseley for that question. And really pleased today and understand that the online booking system, Madam Speaker, is working very well. As a matter of fact, bookings are up over 300% for yurts and cabins, Madam Speaker, and we're certainly looking forward to continued bookings over the coming days for Manitobans to get out and enjoy our beautiful Manitoba parks.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Wolseley on a supplementary question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm really glad the online system is working well today for campers, but just so that the minister isn't confused, I'm actually talking about day passes, and the day trips to provincial parks for families the cost has doubled. $600,000 a year is going to a private Texas company, hundreds of thousands of dollars per year that could have stayed in the province and been invested in our parks. It could have made the parks more affordable or accessible for everyone to enjoy. Why does the minister continue to send $600,000 to Texas every year?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Climate and Parks.
Well, thank you again, Madam Speaker, and certainly we know that Manitobans enjoy and will continue to enjoy some of the most reasonable rates across Canada. Better yet, probably in North America, Madam Speaker, when it comes to visiting our parks, whether it be a day pass, a 3-day pass, or an annual pass, Madam Speaker, we know that Manitobans are going to continue to enjoy our parks at some of the most reasonable rates right across Canada.
Hear, hear.
Order. The honourable member for Wolseley on a final supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Manitobans have been clear. They want all aspects of their parks to remain public. But this government, this minister, this government, the previous minister have not listened. Instead, they continue to use a Texas-based company to charge Manitobans more. Will the minister stop this privatization and commit today to not sending any more money to Texas?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment, Climate and Parks.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm sure the member, when she pulls out the history novel, she'll realize that under the NDP, the former NDP government, Madam Speaker, that services were privatized under the NDP. That's correct, Madam Speaker. Privatized under the former NDP government. Madam Speaker, let's be clear. Madam Speaker, let's be clear, and the leader of the opposition will understand this. Our parks are not for sale.
Can't buy them.
The Honourable Member for Kuwait-Nook.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We know the entire board of Manitoba Hydro resigned because they couldn't meet with Brian Pallister. But Brian Pallister didn't stop there. He blamed the Manitoba Métis Federation for his own failings, and then he canceled deals negotiated in good faith, and that's just simply wrong. The Premier has the chance to, with the budget, to right these wrongs. Will the Premier act and negotiate in good faith with the MMF on hydro?
Order. The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation and Northern Relations.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank the member opposite. I've been talking about reconciliation and the importance of everyone being on board with reconciliation. And we had a good sidebar at the MMF Assembly last week and agreed to work together on the reconciliation file. With respect to the Red River Métis, we are in continual communication with the Red River Métis on matters that are important to their ministers, to their departments, to their government. I always look forward to having respectful conversations with President Chartrand. He has been in my office numerous times. We continue to have very engaging dialogue and continue to work together on these files.
The Honourable Member for Kuwait-Nook on a supplementary question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If you can't acknowledge the mistakes of the past, you can't fix them. The Premier should be turning the page on Brian Pallister's attacks on the Manitoba Métis Federation, but we aren't seeing any concrete action here. Hydro is one of the biggest and most important files that we have. Will the Premier commit to rectifying the wrongs done to the Manitoba Métis Federation and the people of Red River Métis on hydro in the budget today?
The Honourable First Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. And there was a very good AGM that the MMF had on Saturday. I was pleased with many of my colleagues to attend that event and had various good discussions with many of the members there that day, over 2,000 members. It was a great turnout, Madam Speaker, the first time in a couple of years, obviously, because of COVID. So it was a great turnout. I've had several great productive discussions with David Chartrand, and Madam Speaker, next week there'll be a budget where there'll be many more good news stories that come out of that when it comes to reconciliation in our province.
The time for oral questions has expired. Petitions. The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Miigwech, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background to this petition is as follows. 1, Manitoba women, girls, two-spirit, genderqueer, non-binary, and trans persons deserve to be safe and supported when accessing abortion services. 2, limited access to effective and safe abortion services contributes to detrimental outcomes and consequences for those seeking an abortion, as an estimated 25 million unsafe abortions occur worldwide each year. 3, the provincial government's reckless healthcare cuts have created inequity within the healthcare system, whereby access to the abortion pill mifegaimiso and surgical abortions are less accessible for northern and rural individuals than individuals in southern Manitoba, as they face travel barriers to access the handful of non-urban healthcare professionals who are trained to provide medical abortions. 4, For over 5 years and over the administration of 3 failed health ministers, the provincial government operated under the pretense that reproductive health was not the responsibility of the Ministry of Health and Seniors Care and shifted the responsibility to a secretariat with no policy, program, or financial authority within the healthcare system. 5, and for over 4 years, the provincial government has refused to support Bill 200, the Safe Access to Abortion Services Act, which will ensure the safety of Manitoba women, girls, two-spirit, genderqueer, non-binary, and trans persons accessing abortion services, and the staff who provide such services by establishing buffer zones for anti-choice Manitobans around clinics. We petitioned the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to immediately ensure effective and safe access to abortion services for individuals regardless of where they reside in Manitoba, and to ensure that buffer zones are immediately legislated. Signed by many Manitobans. Thank you.
In accordance with our Rule 132(6), when petitions are read, they are deemed to be received by the House. The Honourable Member for River Heights.
Madam Speaker, I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background to this petition is as follows. People who suffer hearing loss due to aging, illness, employment, or accident not only lose the ability to communicate effectively with friends, relatives, or colleagues, they also can experience unemployment, social isolation, and struggles with mental health. A cochlear implant is a life-changing electronic device that allows deaf people to receive and process sounds and speech, and also can partially restore hearing in people who have severe hearing loss and who do not benefit from conventional hearing aids. A processor behind the ear captures and processes sound signals which are transmitted to a receiver implanted into the skull that relays the information to the inner ear. The technology has been available since 1989 through the Central Speech and Hearing Clinic, founded in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The surgical hearing implant program began implanting patients in the fall of 2011 and marked the completion of 250 cochlear implant surgeries in Manitoba in the summer of 2018. The program has implanted about 60 devices since the summer of 2018, as it is only able to implant about 40 to 45 devices per year. There are no upfront costs to Manitoba residents who proceed with cochlear implant surgery, as Manitoba Health covers the surgical procedure, internal implant, and the first external sound processor. Newfoundland and Manitoba have the highest estimated implantation cost of all provinces. Alberta has one of the best programs with Alberta Aids for Daily Living, and their cost share means the patient pays only approximately $500 out of pocket. Assistive Devices Program in Ontario covers 75% of the cost, up to a maximum amount of $5,444 for a cochlear implant replacement speech processor. The BC Adult Cochlear Implant Program offers subsidized replacements to aging sound processors through the Sound Processor Replacement Program. This provincially funded program is available to those cochlear implant recipients whose sound processors have reached 6 to 7 years old. The cochlear implant is a lifelong commitment, however. As the technology changes over time, parts and software become no longer functional or available. The cost of upgrading a cochlear implant in Manitoba of approximately $11,000 is much more expensive than in other provinces, as adult patients are responsible for the upgrade costs of their sound processor. In Manitoba, pediatric patients under 18 years of age are eligible for funding assistance through the Cochlear Implant Speech Processor Replacement Program, which provides up to 80% of the replacement costs associated with a device upgrade. It is unreasonable that this technology is inaccessible to many citizens of Manitoba who must choose between hearing and deafness due to financial constraints, because the costs of maintaining the equipment are prohibitive for low-income earners or those on a fixed income, such as old age pension or employment and income assistance. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to provide financing for upgrades to the cochlear implant covered under Medicare, or provide funding assistance through the Cochlear Implant Speech Processor Replacement Program to assist with the replacement costs associated with the device upgrade. Signed by Sandra Neustatter, Mark Neustatter, Lucas Neustatter, and many other Manitobans.
The honourable member for Elmwood.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background of this petition is as follows. Number one, the United States government has identified lead water pipes as a clear and present danger to the American public health, and President Biden has announced 100% replacement of lead water pipes in 10 million U.S. homes and 400,000 schools and child care centers as part of the America's Job Plan. Number two, 2,755 homes in the Elmwood East Kildonan area have lead water pipes connecting their basements to the city-owned water pipes at their property line. Homes built before 1950 are likely to have lead water pipes running to this connection. Number three, new lead level guidelines issued by Health Canada in 2019 are in response to finding that lead concentration in drinking water should be kept as low as reasonably achievable, as lead exposures are inherently unsafe and have serious health consequences, especially for children and expectant mothers. Number four, 31% of Winnipeg's 23,000 homes with lead water pipes connecting basements to the city-owned water pipes at the property line were found to have lead levels above the new Health Canada lead level guidelines. Number five, the City of Winnipeg has an inventory of which homes and public buildings, including schools and daycares, that have the lead water pipe connection to the city's water main, and will only disclose this information to the homeowner or property owner. The cost of replacing the lead water pipe to individual homeowners is over $4,000. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to immediately contact all home and property owners in Manitoba with lead water pipes connecting to the city water main, and provide meaningful support to them for lead water pipe replacement and their access to clean water as assured, and exposure to lead as health risks are eliminated. And this petition is signed by many, many Manitobans.
Would there be leave of the House to accept the petition read by this member as written? Agreed and so ordered. The honourable member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. To the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba. The background of this petition is as follows. An estimated 1 million people suffer from eating disorders in Canada. Eating disorders are serious mental illnesses affecting one's physical, psychological, and social function, and have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. The development and treatment of eating disorders are influenced by the social determinants of health, including food and income security, access to housing, health care, and mental health supports. It is important to share the diverse experiences of people with eating disorders across all ages, genders, and identities, including Indigenous, Black, and racialized people, queer and gender diverse people, people with disabilities, people with chronic illness, and people with co-occurring mental health conditions or addictions. It is necessary to increase awareness and education about the impact of those living with or affected by eating disorders in order to dispel dangerous stereotypes and myths about these illnesses. Setting aside 1 week each year to focus attention on eating disorders will heighten public understanding, increase awareness of culturally relevant resources and supports for those impacted by eating disorders, and encourage Manitobans to develop healthier relationships with their bodies. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to support a declaration that the first week in February of each year be known as Eating Disorders Awareness Week. This has been signed by many Manitobans.
The honourable member for Concordia.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background to this petition is as follows. Number 1, the population of those aged 55 plus has grown to approximately 2,500 in the city of Thompson. Number 2, a large percentage of people in this age group require necessary medical foot care and treatment. Number 3, a large percentage of those who are elderly and or diabetic are also living on low incomes. Number 4, the Northern Regional Health Authority, the NRHA, previously provided essential medical foot care services to seniors and those living with diabetes until 2019. Then subsequently cut the program after the last 2 nurses filling those positions retired. Number 5, the number of seniors and those with diabetes has only continued to grow in Thompson and surrounding areas. Number 6, there is no adequate medical care available in the city and region, whereas the city of Winnipeg has 14 medical foot care centers. Number 7, the implications of inadequate or lack of podiatric care can lead to amputations. Number 8, the city of Thompson also serves as a regional healthcare service provider, and the need for foot care extends beyond just those served in the capital city of the province. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to provide the services of 2 nurses to restore essential medical foot care treatment to the city of Thompson, effective April 1st, 2022. And this petition, Madam Speaker, is signed by many Manitobans.
The honourable member for St. Boniface.
Madam Speaker?
On a point of order.
Oh, simply to say that I referred to a letter and I would like to table it in my questions earlier.
Thank you. We appreciate the member tabling what he read from earlier. Does not have a point of order, but we appreciate the tabling. Grievances? Orders of the day, government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a leave request for the House. Due to the cabinet shuffle that happened in January, sponsorship for Bill 7, the Police Services Amendment Act, enhancing independent investigation unit operations, was automatically transferred from the member for Morden Winkler to myself, the member for Steinbach. The second reading debate on this bill is currently standing in the name of the member for Morden Winkler, who had just begun the minister's remarks on the bill when the House rose. Given this change in sponsorship for Bill 7, could you please canvass the House for leave to allow the member for Steinbach, myself, to carry on with and conclude the minister's remarks on Bill 7 so the House can be informed? With the minister's unlimited time, although I'm sure I won't use it, and with the understanding that the member for Morden Winkler will be listed as having spoken to the second reading motion for this bill and will not be allowed to speak on this ever again.
Is there leave to allow the member for Steinbach to carry on with and conclude the minister's remarks on Bill 7 with the minister's unlimited time and with the understanding that the member for Morden Winkler will be listed as having spoken to the second reading motion for this bill and will not be allowed to speak on this again? Is there leave? Leave has been granted. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the House for that granting of the leave. Could you please call for this afternoon's business, Bill number 31, Bill 7, Bill 22, and Bill 16?
It has been announced that the House will consider the following this afternoon: second reading of Bill 31 to be followed by debate on second readings of Bill 7, 22, and 16. Therefore, I will call second reading of Bill 31, the Minor Amendments and Corrections Act 2022. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Seniors and Long-Term Care, the Bill number 31, the Minor Amendments and Corrections Act 2022, be now ready, second time, and referred to a committee of this House. Thank you.
It has been moved by the Honourable Minister of Justice, seconded by the Honourable Minister for Seniors and Long-Term Care, that Bill number 31, the Minor Amendments and Corrections Act 2022, be now read a second time and be referred to a committee of this House. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to speak on Bill number 31, the Minor Amendments and Corrections Act 2022. This bill is an annual bill. I think it used to be called SCAMA. If I'm correct, I don't remember exactly what the acronym stood for, but it didn't sound very good. So it's been changed to the Minor Amendments and Corrections Act. It's an annual bill that corrects typographical, numbering, and minor drafting and translation errors. The bill also will contain minor amendments to a variety of different acts. From a procedure perspective, what happens is that department officials will, over time, over the course of a year, notice things that are either not properly translated or small corrections that they feel need to be made to legislation, and then they bring that forward to the minister who is responsible for bringing forward the Minor Amendments and Corrections Act, and it's been myself for a while, and then they're compiled in this bill. So most, if not all, of these corrections aren't specific to the Department of Justice. The department that I'm primarily responsible for is the minister, but they are from a compilation of different departments. So when there are questions from the critics, if there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer them, but recognizing a lot of these come from a variety of different departments, but I could always try to get those answers at second reading if I'm not able to provide them on the floor this afternoon. But I do want to bring forward a couple of explanations about things that might be a little bit more substantive in the bill that are more than just minor typographical or translation errors. The bill will modernize the title of the Act, the Coat of Arms, Emblems, and Manitoba Tartan Act, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Act is retitled as the Manitoba Emblems Act, and the provincial flag from the Provincial Flag Act is added as a schedule, because currently the Provincial Flag Act only contained the one provision dealing with Manitoba's flag, and that act is repealed. So for greater certainty, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are not repealing the flag, the provincial flag. It is simply moving under the Manitoba Emblems Act. And that's really so that, over time, as emblems have been added, they've often gone under their own act, the flag being one. But those who are researching perhaps the legislation and looking at what Manitoba's emblems are, and we recently added the polar bear as an emblem in Manitoba, they can go under the one act and not have to go through a number of different acts. And I want to do something similar when it comes to the different recognition days, and I've talked to the opposition about that, and we'll have more discussions. But it's just really about being able to make things a bit more orderly and easy to find for people who are looking for things specific about Manitoba in terms of the emblems. The Healthcare Directives Act is amended to extend a restriction and a benefit to common law partners. Spouses are already accounted for in the affected provisions. The first instance concerns the execution of a healthcare directive when someone is signing on behalf of the maker of the directive. Currently, neither the person signing on behalf of the maker nor the witness can be the proxy decision maker or the proxy's spouse. And that would make sense, of course, so that there's not concern about the motivation for a person who's signing in those capacities. The amendment extends this rule to also restrict the common law spouse of a proxy from acting as either the signer or the witness, because they would have the same kind of relationship, of course, as a spouse. The second instance concerns gifts to signers, witnesses, or proxies. Currently, the entitlement of a signer, witness, or proxy, or their spouse to a gift from the maker is not void simply because the person acted as the signer, witness, or proxy for the maker. The amendment extends this entitlement to common law partners or signers, witnesses, and proxies. So it just modernizes the language that we have in most other acts and the provisions that allow or restrict for those who are in a common law relationship. Minor changes are made to the Poverty Reduction Strategy Act with respect to the composition of the Committee on Poverty Reduction and Social Inclusion. The requirement that one member be appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council from the Premier's Advisory Council on Education, Poverty, and Citizenship is removed. The number of people who are required to be appointed to the committee by the Lieutenant Governor and Council based on recommendations from the Minister after consultation with United Way and other community groups is increased from 3 to 4. So it gives a bit more flexibility in terms of who can be appointed, but of course the important provision of consultation still remains. The recently proclaimed Public Services Act is amended by this bill to expand the category of government entities subject to Part 6 conflict of interest and post-employment restrictions for senior public executives by including prescribed reporting organizations. This defined term includes both government agencies and any other organization prescribed by regulation. Prior to the amendment, the conflict of interest rules only applied to government agencies, so reporting organizations such as Shared Health and the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority were excluded from the restrictions. The restrictions will now apply to such organizations, and this is something that's been commented upon over the years by various individuals, that senior leaders in these outside reporting organizations and entities really function in as important role as those who are in executive council or within the core of government. So it's something I think that most Manitobans would look upon as making sense and favorably. The bill amends the Red River College Act to reflect the institution's evolution into a polytechnique. The act is retitled as the Red River College Polytechnique Act, and all references to college within the act are updated to College Polytechnique. Consequential amendments are made to a number of other acts to bring them up to date with the institution's new name, and I know all of us have an appreciation for the great work that educational institution does. Finally, I'll speak to the issue of repealing of bills. The bill repeals 4 inactive acts. The Loan Act of 1982, slightly before I was elected, and the Loan Act of 1989, which were recently discovered to still be on the statute books, though no new loan guarantees are being issued under either the Act from 1982 or 1989. Those acts are repealed to clean up the statute books. Any outstanding loans are unaffected by the repeals of these acts. A private act, the Deer Lodge Curling Club Limited Incorporation Act, is repealed, and it is being repealed at the request of the club itself. And so it, of course, is something that they are seeking. It is no longer functioning and will continue under the Corporations Act. The Sanatorium Board of Manitoba Act is also repealed. It continues as the Lung Association under the Corporations Act. That's something that had been requested for a long time from the Lung Association. And that concludes my, my remarks, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on the many provisions under the Minor Amendments in Corrections Act, the historical and annual bill that is well anticipated by this House every year. And I look forward, given the opportunity, to not only seeing it pass, but introducing the Minor Amendments Corrections Act 2023 next year, if given the opportunity. Thank you very much, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker.
A question period of up to 15 minutes will be held. Questions may be addressed to the minister by any member in the following sequence. First question by the official opposition critic or designate. Subsequent questions asked by critics or designates from other recognized opposition parties. Subsequent questions asked by each independent member. Remaining questions asked by any opposition members, and no questions shall or answer shall exceed 45 seconds. The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Which Acting Deputy Speaker. I'd ask my colleague that this bill removes references to exceptional fines during the pandemic. Why is that? And can the minister explain why so little of the fines that were levied during the pandemic that they were not actually paid?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
While it might have been a more appropriate question for question period itself, I do think it's an important question. So there are both federal fines, of course, under the Federal Quarantine Act, and there are the provincial fines that were levied under the pandemic fines from under the health orders. There's a number of different reasons, and so part of it is that because many of the people who got fined are contesting those fines, and so it goes through the court process, and that's a relatively slow process. There's been about $500,000 that's been collected, and the balance goes to collections itself, like all other fines that aren't collected, and there's further penalties that can happen from that collection process, but nothing in this act changes the fact that those fines are still on the books and going through the process depending which stream.
The member's time has expired. The Honourable Member for River Heights.
Yeah, I just would ask the minister a little bit of the background on the switch to the Polytechnique. It seems to me that this probably could have been done about 20 years ago or more. And why is this a time that it's being done?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
If I understood the member correctly, he was asking about the name change for Red River College and adding the Polytechnique Act. So this is something that probably be better directed to the Minister of Advanced Education and of course the board of Red River College, who has decided to change the name. I suspect that they, you know, like a lot of different colleges, Providence College decided to add university to their name. I think that as they're doing recruiting around the country, they probably see that different names are more reflective of what they're actually offering in terms of education. But I think it's probably a question better directed to Red River itself.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
So this act introduces the flag of Manitoba under the Code of Arms, Emblems, and Manitoba Tartan Act and repeals the Provincial Flag Act. Can the minister explain why this is?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Yes, and I mentioned in my comments, and I want to re-emphasize this, so I'm glad the member asked. They need to stop the news release in their caucuses saying that we're repealing the provincial flag. We simply are, of course, are not. It moves where the flag is housed in terms of statues from its own act, where it's the only thing under an act, under the general provincial emblems, you know, all the other emblems of Manitoba. Anybody who's looking at Manitoba and want to see the emblems would likely go to the Emblems Act and then be able to easily access all of those. So the flag will continue to fly free and fairly in Manitoba and will live for many more years, I'm sure.
The Honourable Member for River Heights.
The minister is changing the Poverty Act to increase the number of people appointed by the minister responsible. And the Minister of Justice has said that this is because they want to broaden the representation. There seems to me that the representation could have been broadened by having in other ways, having people elected by organizations involved with trying to reduce poverty. But certainly, the question that I would have is specifically what types of representation is the minister looking for?
The Honourable Member's time has expired. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I thank my friend for the question. While the Act doesn't rest in the Department of Justice, I'm familiar with the committee, having I've seen its work when I was the Minister of Education. I think that, of course, there's consultation that happens with United Way, and so there's already a determination that there needs to be outside consultation about the kind of people who should be appointed to the committee. I think it's important, though, to have flexibility. Poverty, I think, has been, you know, a challenge for many years, and unfortunately will be a challenge probably for many, many more years. But the nature of it sometimes changes, and it's important to have flexibility in who can be appointed. But it is done with consultation, and I think that is at the heart of the members' questions and comments.
The The honourable member for St. John's.
To follow up on the member for River Heights question, who will be doing this outside consultation to kind of determine who these new folks are going to be?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, and they may not all be new folks necessarily appointed. There are people who are currently on the task force or on the committee, but it does allow for an additional person to be appointed through the consultation with United Way. Obviously, the minister ultimately, I believe, has the order and council authority in terms of the appointment, but that would be done in consultation with community members. The United Way specifically cited, but I believe that there's broad community consultation that is done before those appointments are made.
The honourable member for River Heights.
The minister has said that he wants 4 government-appointed people. Can the minister give us the backgrounds of 4 representative areas which would be important to have on this board?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, again, by the nature of this act, where it compiles a number of changes to a variety of acts from different departments, it's not the Department of Justice that is making the appointments. But from my experience on that particular committee of cabinet, there are representatives from the Indigenous community. There are often people from, I believe, committees aligned with social planning and different sorts of areas in rural and urban Manitoba who are dealing with poverty, those who are connected sometimes to food security through food banks and others. It's not prescribed that it has to be a certain kind of individual, but obviously it is those who are most closely aligned and seeing the challenges and problems in the community.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
This bill amends the Early Learning and Child Care Act, that legislation that passed last year. It allows for lower training standards in the mix of care provided to our kids. Would the minister be open to addressing our concerns in that legislation?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I think because that gets a little bit very specific in terms of the operation of early childhood learning and the act itself. This bill will go to committee. I can endeavor to seek out an answer from the Department of Families, the Department of Education and Early Childhood Learning to get a response to that, but it could also be brought up at committee as well, either by the member or by stakeholders who might come and present at committee.
The Honourable Member for River Heights.
Yeah, I just wondered if the minister would provide a little bit of an explanation for the changes to the Transportation Infrastructure Act.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
It feels like a rapid fire test on all the different parts of government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I can provide, I think, a little bit of information, but I think I will probably run out of time. But the Transportation Infrastructure Act is amended to create an obligation for third parties to maintain an access to a departmental road. If the access is to land, the obligation is placed on the adjacent landowner. If the access is to a non-departmental road, the obligation is on the traffic authority in charge of that road. A similar provision existed in the Highway Transportation Act, which was repealed and replaced by this act.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Okay, well, this bill removes an appointment to the Poverty Reduction Committee from the Premier's own Advisory Council on Education, Poverty and Citizenship. And as my colleague knows, that's because the Advisory Council no longer exists. So I would ask the Minister, why isn't education and reducing poverty a priority for his government?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
It certainly is a priority for the government. I think that that's been borne out by some of the results in Manitoba, as we've seen Manitoba's ranking when it comes to child poverty improve comparative to other provinces. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that there's not more work to do and that there aren't more things that this government wants to achieve on that file, but there's been a number of things already achieved. The reality is that committees in and of themselves and their composition are part of the answer, but they are not the full answer. And so while I appreciate the member opposite's question, she'll also know that there's been good results achieved, but much more to do, because anybody who has a child, anytime there's a child in poverty, there's more work to do.
The honourable member for St. John's.
My colleague had more questions. Just a couple more questions. Last year, your government, or the minister's government, changed the act so that the Poverty Reduction Committee did not have to meet 4 times a year and did not have to face a standing committee. So why isn't, again, education and reducing a priority, reducing poverty a priority for his government?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I know in different departments I've seen sometimes these minimum requirements for meeting, and I've often thought that what they ended up doing was that there would never be more meetings than the minimum standard, because people tried to move towards the minimum standard, and often it would be scheduled that way in the department. I often favored removing those minimum standards because I found that we were meeting way more, and that we shouldn't be setting the bar so low. So when it comes to the number of meetings that happen, of course, opposition has a role and they can hold government to account, but I don't know that quantity always equals quality, and sometimes there are just reasons to have more meetings, and we shouldn't set the bar so low.
The honourable member for St. John's.
And my final question this afternoon. This bill removes references to the exceptional powers of government put in place in 2020. Has the minister done any analysis on these powers, and what has the government learned and might do differently?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I'm not sure if the member is specifically referring to the emergency orders or the pandemic orders that were put into place. I think it's a good question, though, and there's probably learning to be had when it comes to the declaration of emergency. It operated differently in Manitoba than in other provinces, and we had to maintain ours longer than sometimes was necessary. And people, I think, got confused between the emergency order and the public health orders, and they thought they were the same. But the emergency orders often allowed things like marriage licenses not to expire. It often gave more discretion, not more restrictions. But other provinces operated their emergency orders in different ways. But it's probably a good point for analysis. I'm happy to take a follow-up question on that.
The honourable member for St. John's.
Oh, sorry.
Are there any further questions? The floor is now open for debate. The honourable member for St. John's.
Miigwech, Assistant Deputy Speaker. I am so excited to put some words on the record in respect of Bill 31, the Minor Amendments and Corrections Act 2022. I know that the minister probably wanted to speak longer to this, but he was very gracious in giving me some time here. So, as we know, Acting Deputy Speaker, the bill makes minor amendments to several statutes. Our concerns with the previous amendments to these bills are just as relevant today. The bill also repeals some leftover provisions that relate to emergency powers during the pandemic. This is an opportunity to reflect on the government's performance as it relates to these statutory powers. So, for instance, Acting Deputy Speaker, the Emergency Measures Act. So, Bill 31 repeals references to Section 12.3 in the Emergency Measures Act, which were new emergency powers during the pandemic. Certainly, these powers have been since rescinded. Section 12.3 of the Act has been repealed. However, there are still remaining references to Section 12.3 that are leftovers, that Bill 31 now intends to repeal those provisions. Amongst the leftover provisions repealed is Section 20(5), which allowed the courts to set higher than maximum fines for offenses that contravene emergency orders, which have also since been repealed. Certainly, Bill 31 is an opportunity to consider the PC government's approach to penalties during the pandemic, as well as their performance during the pandemic overall. I think that even my colleague would agree that there are certainly lots of lessons to be learned in respect of how to respond to a pandemic, how to handle a pandemic, the measures that should be put in place to support and protect citizens and Manitobans. And certainly, I think one of the areas of concern that should be, at some point, there should be some systemic analysis is in respect of fines. We know that millions of dollars of fines were given to Manitobans who broke public health measures. And the flip side of that is that we know that these same Manitobans who so blatantly and willingly broke and very methodically, actually, in some cases, broke Manitoba's public health measures, which were again meant to protect Manitobans, have not paid 1 single cent of their fines. And so we know that it's been reported well many times in the media that those fines have not been paid, and still to date have not been paid. So certainly, I think moving forward, it is an opportunity for this government and any government afterwards to look at, why people didn't pay their fines, how folks can be held accountable for breaking public health measures that put Manitobans at risk. So certainly, there's a lot of work that can be done there. And then, again, we know that according to provincial data, only 13% of fines handed out during the state of emergency have actually been paid. So about 87% remain outstanding. And these go back as far as April of 2020. That's not a good record for enforcement on behalf of this PC government. I will say it again, and it should be no surprise in this House that, we on this side of the House understand and know, alongside, thousands of other Manitobans, that the PC's response to the pandemic was an absolute failure, and actually quite sad to watch on behalf of the lives of Manitobans. During the summer of 2020, they launched the misguided Ready, Safe, Grow PR campaign for about $425,000. Meanwhile, we know that small businesses in Manitoba were struggling to get dollars that some other folks had easy access to, but others did not. And that PR, which then, gave the false impression to Manitobans that everything was hunky-dory and there's no more pandemic, led the way to our second, third, fourth waves. And that's an utter failure on the part of this government, including the what we saw in our PCHs, including all of the Manitobans and PCHs who were infected with COVID-19 and then ultimately ended up passing from COVID-19, and because of the restrictions, passed alone without family members there present. That's the record of the individuals opposite every single one of those members. We know that they closed the Health Incident Command Center in the summer. Again, rather than prepare for the second wave, they closed it. And what did we see? We saw an utter disaster in the second and third waves. To that end, Chuck Sanderson, who was the former EMO director, says, and I quote, Acting Deputy Speaker, "To have closed the center after the first wave with no forward contingency planning for the second wave that was sure to come was a stunning act of stupidity and short-sightedness." End quote, Acting Deputy Speaker. That is something that I don't think any member opposite should be proud of. When you have folks who are the experts in their field, experts in protecting citizens and protecting Manitobans, when they say that this PC government, the way that they handled the pandemic, or again, didn't even handle the pandemic, a lack thereof, when they call it, somebody with that level of expertise says that the PC government handled the pandemic, it was a stunning act of stupidity and short-sightedness. That's a really sad commentary of all of the work or lack thereof that those members opposite chose not to do. They didn't do adequate testing to identify and isolate the virus. The PC government promised 3,000 tests per day by the end of summer, a target that was rarely achieved, Deputy Speaker. Lines were filling up as soon as sites opened, forcing people to wait over 4 hours with no washrooms. I myself, acting Deputy Speaker, recorded the line of cars in St. John's at the North End MPI testing site. And that was only one of many, many, many days where the lines went as far as Atlantic, down, Atlantic and Maine, to get to Mountain. People were waiting for hours in their cars to be able to get a simple test that would have provided safety for Manitobans and helped isolate the virus. But again, and I've said this many, many times, I've said it many times in this House, and I've certainly said it many, many times publicly, this government tried to do the pandemic on the cheap. They tried to ensure that they didn't have to spend 1 single cent more than they thought they needed to. And, they have failed miserably in everything else, but acting Deputy Speaker, I will say they succeeded in that. They succeeded in not paying 1 penny more than they needed to in a global pandemic. And that's not something to be proud of. That's not something to write home about and celebrate, that they valued Manitobans' lives so little that they tried to do a global pandemic on the cheap, a once in a 100-year lifetime event. They chose to put money before Manitobans. And again, not all Manitobans, because some Manitobans got a lot of money for their businesses and all kinds of things. Only some of them got a lot of money, while the rest of small businesses did not. And in fact, acting Deputy Speaker, I myself, and I know several of our colleagues, have received so many emails and messages on social media from predominantly women small business owners who got nothing from this government to help support their small business in what was, again, the crisis of a lifetime. So again, this government has a way of, supporting those that they deem should get that support, or that in some way helps them ultimately. And then other ones like women didn't get any supports. And again, on the line of women, my colleague from Union Station and my colleague from Notre Dame talks about how we still have Manitobans that don't have a contract. They are going on like year 4 or 5 with no contract, and yet it was these Manitobans, predominantly women and predominantly BIPOC women, that put their lives on the line day in and day out, working at personal care homes, working on the front lines of emergency rooms, and with little appreciation, with little regard, with little dollars. Again, because this government chose to put money before the well-being and health of Manitobans, including those that were working in the front lines of our healthcare system. That is just a sad, sad commentary. And so when we look at Bill 31 and repealing and rescinding some of these emergency measures acts, it is an important moment to also be doing that analysis on where they utterly failed. Which again, I will also, for the record, again say that we are calling on this government to call, and they can easily do it, for a public inquiry, so that all Manitobans can understand the decisions that were made that utterly failed Manitobans. And Manitobans have a right to that information. I know that I brought this up, I think, in November of 2020 under the Fatalities Inquiries Act, that they have a responsibility under that act to call an inquest when there are deaths at PCHs. And so we still haven't heard anything to that end about the deaths that have occurred in PCHs. Again, we have Manitobans who died by themselves in absolute chaos and crisis because this government failed to call in the military, failed to give the supports that PCHs and hospitals needed. And so Manitobans who, there's been so many things that have occurred over these last 2 years in respect to the pandemic that will haunt me for the rest of my public life. And one of them is, Acting Deputy Speaker, the seniors and elders who died alone in PCHs because of...
Order. I'm sure the member is just about to bring her comments back to the contents of the bill. I know this bill, which makes changes to many existing statutes, but even with the broad scope of the member's remarks, should be relevant to the bill. So I would ask the member to ensure that her comments remain relevant to the bill. Thank you. The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Acting Deputy Speaker. And I would submit to the House that my comments are relevant to the bill because it is the Emergency Measures Acts in which a lot of these decisions that the government undertook in their governance or lack thereof during the pandemic, these are what we're amending and appealing. And so it's important that as we're appealing these measures that were put in place, again, to aid citizens and take care of citizens and take care of the whole province, we're appealing that. But I don't think that the government has done an analysis on how important or the lack thereof, the work that they've done to ensure that those measures they put in place actually worked. They didn't work because the government utterly failed. I have so much more to say on that, Acting Deputy Speaker, but and I know the members would like to hear me continue that. But I'll go on because there's actually quite a bit in Bill 31. So let me move on to the Early Learning and Child Care Act. Bill 31 proposes minor amendments to the Early Learning and Child Care Act. The PC government, the Brian Pallister and Stephenson governments have missed an opportunity to undo some of the harmful changes that they made to child care last year, right? Like sometimes in this House, it's so hard to keep up with all of these like harmful bills that they keep introducing year after year after year. It's kind of, you get dizzy with all of the bad decisions that this government is making on behalf of Manitobans. And so I'll remind the House that last year the PCs passed Bill 47, the Early Learning and Child Care Act, which allowed public funds to be handed over to private for-profit daycare. We know that every study of for-profit childcare shows that the for-profit motive in this care means worse quality for our children. And there's not a debate on this, Acting Deputy Speaker, I'm sure. Well, I don't know if these folks here would actually agree with it, but it's in studies, it's in research that I would encourage them to read. We know that for-profit daycare centers put downward pressure on the wages of early child care educators, and many early child care educators struggle to make a living wage to pay for the necessities of full life. I would hope, and they, when they go door to door, and I know certainly I've heard it since I've been elected in 2016, but I certainly heard it in 2019 when I went to doors and folks talking about the child care infrastructure here in Manitoba. And I had so many folks that are working in the child care infrastructure telling me that they're leaving, that they can barely make ends meet, and that they're leaving because of the decisions that this government, these folks here, have made year after year after year since 2016 when they got elected. And it's a pretty sad commentary when a government which is charged with, all governments, doesn't matter what party you are, all governments are charged with doing what's in the best interest of their citizens, the citizens of the province that they represent. It's a sad commentary that year after year after year, this PC government has attacked the child care infrastructure, to the point that people are leaving it. People love their jobs, and they're very gifted at taking care of people's children. I've said it many, many times here. If it were not for the amazing child care center that I had for both of my sons, I wouldn't be where I am today. It allowed me to go to university. It allowed me to get 1 degree. It allowed me to get 2 degrees. It allowed me to almost get my 3rd degree. It allowed me to work. I wouldn't be here. Like, thank the gods for the folks that worked at the daycare that took such great care of my sons that I am forever grateful for. Every Manitoban deserves to have childcare for their children. They deserve to have the best childcare for their children, that when they drop them off in the morning, they know that they're being taken care of, and they have the peace of mind to go get that training, go to university, go back to school, go to the job, whatever they need to do. And again, I've said this many times over the years, you know, it is a special kind of government, to put it lightly, that would attack childcare workers and attack childcare centers and attack, ultimately, Acting Deputy Speaker, ultimately attacking children. And you know, it's not the only time that this government has attacked children in legislation and policies. You know, we saw them attack them when they got rid of the what was that formula? The baby formula?
Oh yeah.
What was it called again?
It was the formula they.
When they took away the dollars for milk and
milk for babies.
Milk for babies.
Milk for babies.
Yeah.
You took milk away
So
from
the
babies.
PC government, Acting Deputy Speaker, took money away from babies for milk.
Literally. Yeah.
Like milk subsidies. Like who takes away milk subsidies from babies? And then again, this is a special kind of government to have a member of their caucus who publicly says they don't want to feed children. Like it's mind-blowing that these folks here who are elected and supposed to represent Manitobans, all Manitobans, and do it in a good way, don't want to give kids milk, don't want to feed children, want to attack the infrastructure of childcare. Like, it is absolutely mind-blowing. And anybody that's watching this, and of course anybody that's going to read this, for years to come is going to know that the Brian Pallister and Stephenson governments took milk away from kids. Like, that's not something to be proud of. But it leads me into my next discussion, Acting Deputy Speaker, on Bill 31, in respect of the Poverty Reduction Strategy Act. We know since 2016, and the minister knows this as well, that this government and the Brian Pallister government have done absolutely nothing in tackling poverty. Absolutely nothing. And so we have some of the highest levels of poverty that affect, again, Manitoba children. And again, I want to remind them, the member for Radisson doesn't want to feed these children, doesn't want to feed the children who, their parents are struggling. And they don't want to make sure that when they go to school that they get something. I remember going to school and having a breakfast program. It was sometimes the only meal that I ate that day. I remember that. And, it's pretty disgusting that they have a member that doesn't want to do that, doesn't want to feed kids. And so, to that end, it's not then surprising, Acting Deputy Speaker, that we haven't really seen anything in respect of the All Aboard Committee, or that we haven't seen any poverty reduction strategy since 2016. Because again, when you're a Conservative, you've kind of got that, like, pick yourself up from your bootstraps and da-da-da, don't expect anybody to help you. You've got to do it on your own, which is what we heard during the pandemic. We heard it from Brian Pallister. We heard it from this Premier, that the government can't help you. Then why are you there? Why did all these folks run for government if you're not willing to help the people of whom you're elected to help? I don't understand why any of them are even here. Like, they should just go to their mansions and go get contracts and jobs with all their rich friends. Yep. Yepers. Yes,
Could
absolutely.
we bring the conversation order? Could we bring the conversation back to the bill at hand, please? The honourable member for St. John's.
Acting Deputy Speaker Miigwech for that. I am bringing it to the bill at hand. It's not my fault that I'm pointing out that some of these PC members are millionaires. Some of these PC members, including the Premier, forgets about $31 million. Like, who forgets $31 million? And so it is relevant to the conversation. I know they're getting upset because they want to pretend that they're of the people, by the people, for the people. They have no clue what the people are. They're so rich, they don't need to...
Order. I will remind the member again from St. John's, please put some relevance into the conversation. And the honourable member for St. John's, if we could have a little bit of quiet in here, please.
Acting Deputy Speaker is asking for quiet so that we can hear my speech about how many millions of dollars that the members opposite have. And so when you have a Premier that forgets about $31 million, coupled with, juxtaposed to a member of their caucus who doesn't want to feed kids, it's a sad, sad commentary, Acting Deputy Speaker. So, I mean, I could go on and on and on about how much money and connection and privilege the folks opposite have, but I'll move on to another part of the bill. I mean, unless the minister wants me to continue on about the millions of dollars, I certainly can. So the other part of Bill 31 is the Credit Unions and Caisse Populaire Acts. And so Bill 31 proposes an amendment to the Credit Unions and Caisse Populaires Act. Credit unions offer, as you know, Acting Deputy Speaker, a cooperative model of banking and provide many benefits to the users. There are 23 credit unions with 178 combined locations in Manitoba. And in many communities, credit union is the only financial institution serving its residents, small businesses, and producers. So it's important to ensure that credit unions can continue to serve these communities. To that end, we must be careful that these changes to the governance and oversight of credit unions does not negatively impact for Manitobans, so that all Manitobans might have equitable access to finance services. And I think on that note, Acting Deputy Speaker, there's so much more to say about Bill 31, the Minor Amendments and Corrections Act. I know that the minister responsible for the bill is very proud of it. He only put a couple of minutes of words on the record, but that's okay. He forgot some stuff that I put on the record. Thank you.
Order, please. The honourable member for River Heights.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to put a few words on the record on this bill, which deals with a number of and varied different acts. And I'll say a few words on a number of these. I think that there are some of these which are reasonable changes. Having common law partners treated the same as spouses in the healthcare directives makes sense. Getting rid of the Loan Acts of 1982 and 1989 is certainly reasonable, because we don't really want the government to be borrowing money on loan acts from many, many years ago. The getting rid of the sanatorium board and making sure that the Lung Association is fully responsible makes sense. There are still, I think in 2020 there were 160 cases of tuberculosis in Manitoba. It is not a condition which is gone, but it is certainly a condition which we treat very differently from what we did when we had sanatoria in Manitoba as we did at Nanette. So we should not neglect tuberculosis. We should make sure that we're being active and vigorous in being on top of any cases and doing what we can to prevent any new cases of tuberculosis. But we no longer need the approach using a sanatorium, which was popular many, many years ago. The change of the name of the Red River College to Red River College Polytechnique is a welcome change. It brings the name of the college up to date and more clearly describes the nature of the Red River College. It's interesting that perhaps the first polytechnique in Canada, I suspect, was the École Polytechnique in Montreal. It was founded in 1873, and it was called a Science Institute or something like that. The name was changed to Polytechnique in 1876, and that was, on the order of 150 years ago. And so it is certainly good that we're keeping up with the times, as it were. But I think the fact that we're moving to have the Red River College as a polytechnique says something about the maturity of the Red River College and about the importance and the variety of the programs that it now runs and the importance that it has to providing technical and other expertise, not only to individual Manitobans, but provides access then to for local businesses and others to the expertise which is generated as a result of the teaching at the Red River College. The Poverty Reduction Act, the change in the number of people who can be appointed by the minister from 3 to 4 is a small change, but it would have been more meaningful if the government had made another change, and that is to bring back the requirement to report to a standing committee. In fact, the standing committee provides accountability. It provides an opportunity for the members of government to focus and make sure that when they come to committee that they're actually doing something and have done something, instead of, as the current government is seeming to do when it comes to poverty, just kind of drifting along and not producing, in fact, substantial results. They have been gliding along probably on the benefits of the federal changes to the child tax credit, which have had a substantial impact, as many agree, to reduce poverty. But we clearly need a more vigorous effort in Manitoba to reduce poverty, and this doesn't cut it in terms of the changes that are needed in order to make sure that we have the emphasis on poverty reduction that we need in this province. I also want to talk about one other act which I would recommend that the Minister of Justice look at, if he's still Minister of Justice next year, and bringing forward this legislation. That's a big question, but maybe if he's not, he can pass this on to whoever is. I believe that some minor amendments would be a good idea to the Endangered Species and Ecosystems Act. This is an important act, and it plays an important function in making sure that there is attention to endangered species and to ecosystems in Manitoba. Manitoba has a committee tasked with assessing species, but there's no requirement of the government to follow through on the recommendations of the committee. So that would be one suggestion, a minor amendment requiring the government to actually pay attention to the recommendations of the committee on species at risk. Indeed, the last time that at-risk species were added to the list of species under the Endangered Species and Ecosystems Act was 2015, which was before this government was elected for the first time in 2016. So the government has been very delinquent in not paying attention to the Endangered Species and Ecosystems Act, and indeed there are dozens of species at risk that remain unlisted in this Endangered Species and Ecosystems Act because of the neglect by the current government. Second, the law as it now stands, the Endangered Species and Ecosystems Act, doesn't require recovery planning and implementation. The government is not held accountable for recovering endangered species. Minor amendment, but it wasn't, and so I'm recommending this for the government next year to consider. And lastly, I see that the Endangered Species and Ecosystems Act prohibits harm to the habitat of listed species, but there's no requirement to identify habitat in the first place.
Order. I know it's a change of shift, but it's getting a little loud in here, and I'm having difficulty hearing the speaker, so if we could just keep it down a little bit, please. The Honourable Member for River Heights.
I know the law, the problem is that the law doesn't require recovery planning and implementation, and no recovery strategies have been produced except for the boreal woodland caribou. And there was a draft action plan produced under the former government 11 years ago, but it was never finalized. And so there would be an opportunity for this government to pay some attention to this important act, the Endangered Species and Ecosystems Act, and make some important improvements to the act in order to make it more functional and to be able to hold the government to be at greater accountability. Mr. Speaker, those are my comments on this act, that there are some things primarily which should have been there but which were not. Clearly there should have been more attention to doing something more meaningful when it comes to poverty reduction, and better attention to doing something more meaningful when it comes to changes to the Endangered Species and Ecosystems Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Merci, miigwech, yakiyu.
Are there any further speakers to Bill number 31? Is the House ready for the question? The question before the House is second reading of Bill number 31, the Minor Amendments and Corrections Act 2022. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt this motion? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. I declare the motion carried. Resuming debate on Bill number 7, remaining in the name of the Minister of Justice. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, and it's great to speak again on this monumental day for Manitoba. as the minor amendments bill passes another hurdle on its way to becoming legislation in the province. But there's another important piece of legislation I'd like to speak to today, and that's Bill 7 and the Police Services Amendment Act, IIU. And before I begin, I want to acknowledge the member for Morden Winkler, my predecessor in this role, who was involved in the consultations on this legislation, and who I know took it very, very seriously and saw the importance of it. And of course, this is a bill that has a lot of history, not the particular iteration of this bill, but the IIU has a lot of history in Manitoba, as it does in many other provinces in Canada. In fact, I know there are still some jurisdictions in Canada that don't have an IIU and who are struggling to establish one, and who've talked to Manitoba about their experience. But it is important because there is a need for an independent investigation unit to be involved when there are very serious matters revolving around police. And we know that law enforcement, the men and women involved in law enforcement, do an exceptional job in difficult circumstances, but that doesn't mean that there aren't problems, challenges, and sometimes things that rise to the level of criminal behavior. Fortunately, those are not many, but when they come up, they're impactful, and they need to be dealt with in the right way. It's been 6 years since the Independent Investigation Unit, known as IIU, was established by the NDP government. I remember, I think I was justice critic at the time, speaking with Dave Chomiak, I was justice critic at the time, speaking with Dave Chomiak, who was the justice minister at the time, about changes to the Police Services Act, many of which came out of the Tammany inquiry, a difficult part in Manitoba history and some of the tragic circumstances around that. But the report itself was about moving things forward and bettering policing in Manitoba, which benefits everybody and I think is supported widely by law enforcement in Manitoba. And at that time, I know the member for St. John's, I believe, was involved in the previous government, I think supported changes to the IIU. But I know in talking with Dave Chomiak when he was the Minister of Justice and probably had discussions with Gordon McIntosh and some of the successor AGs, Ministers of Justice from the NDP, this was always a difficult file because there's a desire to be able to make change, there's a desire for accountability, there's a desire to ensure that when there are things that rise to the criminal level within justice, that they are properly investigated, but it be done independently and be seen to be done independently. And at the time, I remember talking, I think it was to Mr. Chomiak, about how do we ensure that individuals who are doing the investigations are seen to be independent. And one of the great challenges are that those investigation skills are largely held by police. The ability to do an investigation and do it right and do it in a way that conforms to matters of evidence takes significant training. And that training almost entirely is held by police officers. And yet there's an understandable concern about having police officers, active police officers, involved in the investigation of matters that are police related. And so the IIU, I think, was always going to be a bit of an evolution. It started, and the police services changes after the Tammany inquiry started, and I remember saying, I hope I was fair in my assessment as the justice critic at the time, that this would be a starting point and that there would have to be changes as we learned and went along this path. And I think that the Minister of Justice at the time under the NDP probably reflected that in his comments at second reading on the various iterations of the bill leading to this point. But the Police Services Act requires a statutory and regulated review of the Act. That has now been conducted, and we're phasing in a variety of the different changes, IIU being one, led by my friend from Morden Winkler when he was in the role. Other police services amendments have come forward when it comes to standards, both codes of conduct and training standards, policing standards, bill this before the legislature. So we're moving in an iterative process to move along those changes after the statutory review. One of the important things about this particular piece of legislation, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, is that there's going to be more of a role for Indigenous leadership, and there needed to be. And there's been good consultation with Indigenous leadership in Manitoba around how to ensure that there is a built-in part of the process for those voices as well. So this particular bill will establish a Director of Indigenous and Community Relations, a full-time employee of the IIU who will work directly with Manitoba First Nations and Métis and Inuit and marginalized communities to address their questions and concerns. So it's a broad basis. It's not simply First Nations, Métis, and marginalized, but other, Métis and Inuit, but other marginalized communities as well. But a dedicated individual within the IIU to work with those communities. We also know that every individual who dies or is seriously injured in a police use of force incident has a family member at home or somewheres in the community who cared about them. That is why we're establishing a community liaison program that will allow individuals who are affected in a community or organizations to work with the IIU to provide a direct connection between the investigation and the community and ensure that the investigation is conducted with respect and with sensitivity. That's important, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to ensure that there is not only real connection between the investigation and flow of information, but also be seen to be independent and seen to be respectful, Madam Deputy Speaker. While respecting the confidentiality of investigations, these community liaisons will keep families and communities engaged in the status of investigations to ensure that they have confidence in the independence and impartiality of the process. We recognize the need to strengthen the independence of the IIU and ensure compliance with investigations, ensure that no current police officer can serve as an IIU investigator, and empowers the IIU to compel cooperation from all police officers and other designated individuals. And this goes back to the point I was making earlier, Madam Speaker. In those early discussions with Dave Chomiak, I believe it was, when he was Minister of Justice, making changes to the Police Services Act, that discussion about who could do the investigations on the IIU was a difficult discussion. But I came to believe what the government was saying at the time, that it was difficult to get individuals who are not trained as police officers to do that investigation. So often individuals might be seconded into doing the investigation. Now we're moving into a different place because we believe that there is enough individuals to be able to do the investigations who are not currently serving as police officers. So it's an important step in the evolution of this bill. It imposes strict penalties for refusing to cooperate with the IIU investigations, including up to $5,000 fine and 1 year imprisonment for a first offense and a $10,000 fine and 1 year imprisonment for a second offense. That's in line with other bills, Madam Speaker, in the country of Canada. So just in conclusion, Madam Speaker, I want to just make some overarching comments. First of all, the need for an IIU is important. It's important because we need to ensure that there's a process that is independent, that's seen to be independent when there's a police-involved incident that results in a death, an injury, something that goes to a criminal matter. It's important that that be seen to be independent within the broader community. But it's important, of course, that it actually is independent. So this bill moves closer, I think, in an important step. But we also recognize that for the Indigenous community, Métis, Inuit, other marginalized populations, they need to have a connection point with the investigation as well. And that's also within this bill. Having said all of that, I want to commend those who are working in law enforcement, because I know that the vast majority of those who are serving in municipal police forces, who are serving on First Nations police as police officers, those who are in our provincial RCMP police force, do so with all the skills and ability and the intentions of protecting the communities that they serve. I want to just, as part of those comments, acknowledge Commander Jane McClatchy, who announced last week that she would be retiring from the role as Commander of D Division in Manitoba. I believe she'll have served for about 3 years when she wraps up her service at the beginning of June, but has served, I think, 35 years in the RCMP in positions across Canada, last 3 being in Manitoba. And when I had the opportunity to speak to her last week when the RCMP were announcing the record drug seizure from Operation Divergent, she indicated that this has been the most enjoyable part of her career, the last 3 years working in Manitoba, that the connectedness of the communities, the ability to work together with law enforcement across the province has been a highlight for her in her 35 years. So I think that I'll have an opportunity, I hope, in this House to again thank her for her service to the province of Manitoba and to the country of Canada. But I will use this opportunity to do an initial thank you and save other comments for another time. So thank you again for this opportunity. I hope that members opposite will see this bill pass in relatively short order. I know it's a serious bill, so there'll be serious questions and debate, and it should be, but I also know it's important to see it pass in a relatively timely manner. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
A question period of up to 15 minutes will be held. Questions may be addressed to the minister by any member in the following sequence. First question by the official opposition critic or designate. Subsequent questions asked by critics or designates from other recognized opposition parties. Subsequent questions asked by each independent member. Remaining questions asked by any opposition members, and no question or answer shall exceed 45 seconds. The honourable member for St. John's.
Which, Madam Speaker, would the minister be so kind as to say or advise the House which legal experts did he consult with in preparation for the changes of this bill?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Yeah, I can provide at committee a full list of those who were consulted with. The member will know that this is a statutory requirement to review the Police Services Act, and so this fulfilled the statutory requirement. And then within the context of that, there was significant consultation with Indigenous partnership, with those within the legal community, those within the law community, and of course looking at past experiences that are happening in other provinces as well. But I can provide at second reading a detailed list of those at committee.
The honourable member for St. John's.
Bill 7 leaves out cadets and community safety officers from IIU oversight. Can the minister advise why?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
The member is correct. I mean, at this point, it doesn't include those who are serving within the cadets or the community safety officers program. The IIU was always intended to deal with those who are uniformed police officers and not to move into the cadet program. Of course, it's true that the cadet program didn't exist at the time that the IIU, I think, was contemplated initially, but that doesn't mean that there can't be changes and that there might not be iterations that includes those, although they are compelled to cooperate, I believe, with the IIU, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for St. John's.
So the minister obviously is correct in respect of like statutory requirements to the Police Act, but here was an opportunity that the minister and his government could have taken to strengthen the IIU, which would have included including the cadets and community safety officers. So I want to know why if the minister can explain why that opportunity wasn't taken under this particular review.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I mean, I don't want to dismiss the question because I actually think it's an important question, but I also know that when it comes to changes when it relates to the IIU and the expansion and the extension of it, that it's important to understand what the consequences of those might be, where the statutory authority lies, how broad the net gets cast. Again, there are requirements for those to work with the civilian directors in the IIU, but I'm not closed to the idea that as there continues to be changes to the IIU in the future, that the net might not widen further. But this is the step that is being proposed at this time.
The honourable member for St. John's.
We know that the community liaisons are currently not paid under this legislation. Can the minister confirm that? And would he consider compensation for them?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
So the Act doesn't direct compensation. It wouldn't be normal necessarily for there to be, for these kinds of positions, for there to be compensation directed within the Act. But the community liaisons will play an important part of the process going forward, and they will serve under the Indigenous director. And so there will be, at that point, a decision made what kind of compensation would be appropriate. I think that they want to ensure, and we want to ensure, that there's flexibility at first to ensure that it's done properly and respectfully in the way the community wants, but certainly compensation is something that may be considered.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
I can assure the minister, having worked in our communities, particularly in restorative justice, who the minister will know that actually a lot of the restorative justice programs are also filled with volunteers. So I can actually assure the minister that in respect of, compensation and what the communities want, people want to be paid. People want to be paid for their labor. There's always this expectation on First Nation communities and First Nation citizens that we do this labor for free. So, I'm a little worried to hear the minister say that they're going to be looking, with the community and respectfully. People want to be paid. And so I want to know in the statutory review why compensation was not considered.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
So I think it's important to recognize the role of the liaisons. So they're not employees per se, but they will be working with the Director of Indigenous and Community Relations, who will be responsible for the engagement of these community liaisons. And it might be, on individual cases, it might be something that's longer term, but I think it's important to provide flexibility for that director to ensure that they're structuring it in a way that's the most meaningful to the community. And that doesn't mean that there can't be compensation, but I think the flexibility is important.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
Oh, sorry. No, not at all. In terms of the model, it's a model for the IIU that covers the entire province, but clearly that there are employers, there's the Winnipeg Police Service and other police services. What's the rationale for having it be for the entire province, and was there any thought to allowing individual municipalities, sort of if they wanted to have even stricter regulations or be able to direct, not direct police activities, but set policy for their own? Is there a role for civilian oversight at the municipal level in order to be able to set policy for police?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Yeah, it's a good discussion. One that probably doesn't fit as well under the IIU. I think that we've got the IIU piece in this bill, and then there's another bill before the Assembly on standards and on codes of conduct. But there will be another bill coming forward because there's a number of different steps to this that deal with governance. And so I've spoken with city councillors who might be concerned about the role of civilian oversight and wanting to have more input into it. That doesn't fit into this bill as easily as it might into another bill. But I take the member's point. It's not an unhelpful point, but that discussion will come as part of another bill.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
And just to be clear, there is an introduction of an Indigenous director under the MMIWG report. As I understand it, there was a recommendation that in order to have police reform, it would actually be Indigenous-led. So would that be an Indigenous-led program, or would it simply be, is it something, there's an officer in terms of Indigenous relations who is dealing with people who are Indigenous?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
If I understood the member's question correctly, so the Director of Indigenous and Community Relations, which certainly is mandated to engage with the Indigenous community, the Inuit community, Métis community, but also the LGBTQ community, the BIPOC community, other marginalized communities. There isn't a requirement for the individual to be Indigenous, but there will be a preferential contest. So when they're hiring the individual, there'll be a preference to hiring somebody who is Indigenous.
The honourable member for St. John's.
So that was actually my follow-up question to my last question. In respect of the Director of Indigenous and Community Relations, there's actually nothing in there that guarantees, right? Like preference in hiring boards doesn't necessarily mean that an Indigenous person will be hired for this position. And so, as the minister said in his opening comments, this has been something that's been asked for in the community for many, many years, and specifically from the Indigenous community. So I'm curious as to why that was not placed in here, safeguarding that a non-Indigenous person would be hired as the Director for Community Indigenous Relations.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
So, again, while the position is the Director of Indigenous and Community Relations, the mandate does extend beyond the Indigenous community, but there will be a preference for those who are applying who are Indigenous. And I get the member's point. I think it's sometimes difficult to be too prescriptive sometimes in who is hired, but I mean, I certainly understand that there will be critics who will be watching who is hired. There'll be those in the community who will be watching who is hired, and any government, whether it's this government or a future government, will be held accountable for the individual who is hired into those positions. And I think that that probably is a stronger motivation than legislation.
The honourable member for St. Boniface.
I know that a lot of the work towards police oversight was a result of the Crystal Tammon inquiry. I was wondering, was Robert Tammon consulted as part of this, or the Tammon family?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Yeah, I don't want to give the wrong information. I committed to the member opposite, the critic, official opposition critic, that I'll get a list of those who were consulted and provided at committee. I do know that Robert Tammon, in terms of the advice that he's given over the years, coming out of the Tammon inquiry, the various boards that he served on after I met with him several times in my time as elected official, his advice finds its way into many things in terms of law reform, and unfortunately the experience that his family experienced, but it does color its way into many of the reforms that have happened in policing in Manitoba over the last 15 years.
Honourable member for St. John's.
I do want to just put a couple of clarifying comments. I do want to point out that yes, the Police Act was reformed in respect of coming out of the Crystal Tammon inquest or inquiry. But actually prior to that, it also was born out of the police shooting deaths of Matthew Dumas and Craig McDougall. Often they are left out of the discussion when we talk about police reform. So I want to put it in this House today and put those facts on the record because they are often left out of this discussion. I would ask the Minister, what is the consequences of an officer's refusal to promptly pay the fine that's recorded there?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I do appreciate the member opposite raising that point, and we could go back further than that. I know, and there's been many situations in Manitoba where there's been significant things that have happened between law enforcement and the Indigenous population and others, where it's caused there to be introspection and it caused there to be changes. And so it's true that the Tammon inquiry, because of its structure and its nature, did provide a lot of direction and advice. It is very true that there were challenges before that we have also learned from.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
And I thank my colleague for putting those words on the record because, to the families of Matthew and Craig and other individuals, and my colleague is absolutely 100% right. Often when that history is kind of left out, it feels disrespectful to the family. So I appreciate him putting those words on. This bill doesn't address many recommendations laid out in the review, including one to include duty for officers to complete their incident notes as soon as possible. Why were these excluded from this bill?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I mean, there are some things that find their way well into legislation. There are other things that find their way better into policy. And so, you know, the absence of things in legislation doesn't mean that they won't find their way into best practices or policies. That's also part of what we see in the other bill that's before the legislature on changes to the Police Services Act. So the members, you know, comment and other suggestions, just because they don't show up in a legislated framework doesn't mean they won't show up in a way that's equally as effective.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
And my final question in respect to Bill 7 is, for the last couple of years now, there's been a call by the family of Aisha Hudson for a public inquiry, supported by community stakeholders, including Southern Chiefs Organization, MKO, AMC. Will the minister call a public inquiry or an inquest into the shooting death of Aisha Hudson?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I thank the member for the question. While this might not be the appropriate place for that discussion and that debate, I understand why she's raising it at this time, and certainly for the family of Aisha Hudson and all those who were friends. You know, these sort of tragedies leave a lasting impact and cause all of us to take a step back and wonder how things could be done better or differently. That doesn't always require an inquest to do that. It doesn't always require an inquiry to do that, but I think that there are lessons learned in terms of processes and connecting communities that might not always change the result, but I think will better the process for the future, and that might be part of that legacy.
The time for this question period has ended. The floor is open for debate. The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Madam Speaker, I apologize. I do want to just put a couple of words on the record in respect to Bill 7, the Police Services Amendment Act, enhancing independent investigative units operations. There's so much that I'd like to put on the record today. Certainly I'll have more time during third reading. I do want to just go back to a public inquiry in respect of the shooting death of Aisha Hudson, 16-year-old Aisha Hudson. I know that the minister just said that, you know, that those are not always the only tools that are available to, you know, assess and figure out what happened in a particular incident. I do want to remind the House that many years back, when I was the Director of Justice for the Southern Chiefs Organization, a young 18-year-old young man, an Indigenous young man by the name of Matthew Dumas, was actually walking to work. And it was his first day of work. And in the span of 5 minutes, after coming into contact with the WPS, Matthew was shot and killed. And 5 minutes, that's all it took for this young Indigenous man to lose his life at the hands of the Winnipeg Police Service. Less than 24 hours after that, I was met with the family and supporting the family. And for years, supported the family, including during their inquest. And there was an inquest called into the shooting death of Matthew Dumas. And at the time, the minister was Dave Chomiak. And again, I was the Director of Justice at Southern Chiefs Organization, so I was always a part of these meetings, coming to this building, being in his office, and was able at that time to help negotiate for the family to have the province help pay for their legal fees. Because a lot of people don't realize that when there's an inquest called, the government will appoint inquest counsel, and that inquest counsel is supposed to represent, you know, Manitoba, is supposed to also represent the family. And luckily we had a phenomenal lawyer by the name of Don Worm, who is actually one of the first Indigenous lawyers in Saskatchewan, who I absolutely love him. He is so smart, so intelligent, just so amazing at what he does. And he was the family's lawyer. And on the first day of the inquest at the Law Courts building, in the opening comments, the inquest counsel was Robert Tapper. And in his opening comments to the sitting inquest judge, who I can't remember his name, so I apologize for that. But Robert Tapper's opening comments to the judge was something along the lines of, you will see, Your Honor, that there are claims that this was racially motivated and that this has to do with systemic racism. But you will see that this is not the case. And I remember sitting in the court and looking at the family, and the family and I are looking at each other. So there was inquest counsel already providing the court with the outcome of the inquest. And I remember being incredibly disappointed and upset that Robert Tapper did this, who in my mind had no business already determining the outcome of an inquest. And so luckily, the family had their own inquest lawyer, again, Don Worm, who unpacked it and dismantled what Robert Tapper attempted to do in his opening comments, and also dismantled the police narrative on behalf of the family. Why do I share all of that? Because Matthew Dumas was just an 18-year-old child going to his first job, and who was mistakenly identified by the WPS. And in that mistake, lost his life within 5 minutes. And his family was forever changed. And so when we talk about Aisha Hudson, there is lots to be learned and lots to be gained and lots to be prevented and lots to be recommended that would come out of public inquiry into this child's death. I think that, and I know that Aisha Hudson's life was worthy. Aisha Hudson's life was valuable. Aisha Hudson's life means something to her family and means something to the greater community. And, you know, Aisha Hudson, as an Indigenous young girl who, again, I shouldn't have to explain the history of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited in this country, but, you know, only a couple of years ago with the National Inquiry, it was determined that there's an ongoing genocide of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited. And why is that? Because Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited's lives are deemed not as worthy as other women's lives. Aisha Hudson's life is worthy of an inquiry. Her family is worthy of an inquiry to find out what happened in its entirety and how it could have been avoided. To that end, I just want to take a quick moment to lift up Aisha's parents, William and Christy, and Aisha's stepmom, Cheyenne, and her siblings that she has. You know, Aisha was and is loved by her family. And so in the same way that, you know, there were other public inquiries, again, not the least the Crystal Tammon inquiry, which again is 100% warranted and was needed. In the same way, there is a case before Manitoba in its collective that is worthy of an inquiry. And I suggest and I submit to the chamber today that the life of Aisha Hudson deserves a public inquiry. So I really do call on the minister to take that consideration seriously, and so that we can understand that situation and what occurred in its entirety better. The minister brought some facts in his opening statement. And again, I think that I don't know if the minister knows that it's in its entirety, but I was part of the advisory group back in whatever year that would have been, 09 or 07, in respect to the development of an IIU and the changes to the Police Services Act. In fact, even well before that, when, again, as the special advisor on not the special advisor, the Director of Justice for the Southern Chiefs Organization, that was primarily my file. Indigenous police relations. And I started working there, I think, in 2002. And, slowly had come to know all of the different files that I worked on, including those moments, again, of when our folks come into conflict with the law or come into contact with the police, and how quickly those situations can go from, 0 to 60. In which our people don't fare very well out of those situations. And so long before even the discussions the official discussions of the Police Act and IIU, I was part of those discussions in respect of our Indigenous community. In fact, and I don't know what year it would have been, but I remember it was really, really cold. We had brought in the Special Investigators Unit from Ontario. And for the life of me, I'm getting really old, Madam Speaker, I can't remember his name, but I brought him to Manitoba so that he could share with us, because they had a special investigations unit, and he was the one that had kind of established it from Ontario, and it was a really good model. And so we brought him in. I remember we had so many people attend that meeting, and he shared how Manitoba could have a special investigations unit. And, there's been lots of discussions across the country on how to strengthen police accountability and police complaints mechanisms. And certainly, I agree with my colleague along the way that, there are ways to strengthen. And in many respects, these things evolve and change over the years. So I do agree with him with that. Bill 7 was an opportunity to strengthen it and go a little bit further. And I alluded to some of that in my questions. Bill 7 could have included cadets and community safety officers. It was an opportunity to be able to do so, but we know that they're not included in Bill 7. So I would have liked to have seen some of those changes as well. And again, I remember when we were having these discussions about, this IIU that was going to be set up, I remember talking about having a position that was specifically about, a director of, whatever it would be, a director of Indigenous Affairs or Indigenous investigations, whatever. But I also remember that we talked about having civilians that would be part of this new IIU that would work alongside police officers, because, as the minister said, and he's absolutely right, there is an inherent distrust of only former police officers investigating current sitting police officers. Inherently, there's a distrust there because, again, they come from the same training, they come from the same crop of officers across the country, and everybody knows that there is a bond among police officers. And so, it is, not uncommon that people would not trust that police officers or former police officers can do a fair and unbiased investigation of a police officer. That still exists. There are still concerns with IIU in respect to the investigators that do those investigations. Now, I don't want anybody to say, the member for St. John's is, saying this or that. I do agree that, former officers can do a good job as well. I'm not saying that they're not. I don't want anybody to put words into my mouth. But I think that there is something to be said about marrying marrying former police officers with civilian investigators. And people will often say, well, you know, we can't have civilians do investigations because they don't know, you know, the ins and outs of policing and da-da-da. Well, we have civilian investigators that investigate sexual assault of children for CFS. We currently have that infrastructure where we have civilian individuals that go for training to undertake investigations in respect of sexual assault or abuse. We have those civilians. So I would submit to the House that we can marry, have the opportunity to marry former police officers and civilians to be to undertake those investigations and give some semblance of confidence to the public that when an incident occurs that is referred to the IIU, that it's an actual unbiased, comprehensive, robust investigation. And that currently doesn't exist. And, you know, that's just the reality, that there's that distrust there. I want to go a little bit in respect to the director for, where's my bill? The director for Indigenous Relations. I don't know what it's called here. I do want to say that, you know, as I asked in my question about, you know, whether or not there's a mechanism to ensure, and why it wasn't put in there, that this director would be Indigenous. It's important that we recognize, so the Director of Indigenous and Community Relations is created. It would have been really important to include in the legislation that this individual must be Indigenous. And the reason why this individual must be Indigenous, despite this individual also potentially working with, you know, the LGBTQ2S community or other marginalized Manitobans, it's okay to have an Indigenous person in that position. That position was born out of the recommendations of the Indigenous communities. Either it's the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls that comes out of that, or the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry, or the Aboriginal Justice Implementation Commission, or the RCAP. There are a variety, or the IPRWASH Inquiry. Like, there's all kinds of reports across the country that talk about this concept of a Director of Indigenous and Community Relations. That idea was born in our communities. It was born in our communities from our experiences with police. So, you know, I think it would have been nice to have seen that entrenched in the legislation, because as I said in my questions, it's not a guarantee that when somebody puts out a job posting and it says preference given to Indigenous peoples or preference given to, you know, women or whatever, it's not a guarantee that that individual, that community will actually get the job. And so I find it disheartening that a concept, an idea, a recommendation that comes from our experiences as Indigenous peoples, there's still the possibility, the open possibility, that you could have a non-Indigenous person that is in that position. And so I find that very disappointing. I think that there's an opportunity for the minister to make some amendments and to ensure that this Director of Indigenous and Community Relations is Indigenous. We have the expertise within our community. There are phenomenal Indigenous community members in Manitoba that have been working on policing for years and years and years, and that have that expertise and that direct knowledge. And so the labor's there, the people are there. You have to ensure that there's the commitment from the government to actually hire an Indigenous person. I want to talk about a little bit about, in respect of a gendered analysis for the IIU. You know, which again we could have been strengthened in Bill 7 to the fact that, you know, the vast majority of the folks that work in IIU are men. And, you know, in every single position, every single space and place We should be working towards gender equality, which includes obviously women and gender non-conforming folks, and we don't see that in the IIU. And so I would have liked to have seen Bill 7 strengthen the IIU moving towards more gender equity. And more specifically, Madam Speaker, let me be explicitly clear. When I say gender equality, I am also talking about ensuring that there's equity in respect of hiring BIPOC and employing BIPOC women and gender diverse folks. And so we don't really see that in the bill as well, and that's a missed opportunity on the part of the government to strengthen IIU. And then finally, Madam Speaker, you know, I think that there's several things that we need to be looking at when we're looking at IIU, right? And so, you know, I just want to pose some questions that I think that we could have looked at in respect to Bill 7. And those are, you know, how can the Attorney General ensure that any amendments will increase trust with IIU decisions, and further, how will the the AG work to change the bias within the Justice Department as a whole in respect to BIPOC? So, you know, there's a lot of things that we need to be considering when we're looking at policing. You know, there's IIU, that's one component to it, but we still have LIRA, and I know there's been, you know, there's another bill that's before the House that looks at LIRA and actually just did the bare minimum. Those changes just, you know, move it from 30 days to 90 days. That's literally the bare minimum. Manitoba doesn't have a great record in respect of police complaints processes and police accountability. We need to go further at enhancing the infrastructure for police accountability in this province, because there is a lot of distrust for the police. There's a lot of distrust for the complaints processes that are currently available, including the RCMP complaints processes, which can take months, and people don't even get their results. We know that LIRA takes a long time to get any semblance of results or investigation. And we also know that LIRA doesn't have a great track record on actually finding any police officers culpable in any of the things that they've done. So, you know, it's not surprising that Manitobans don't have faith or trust in the complaints processes here in Manitoba, and this is a missed opportunity. The other bill that's before the House is a missed opportunity on to strengthen police accountability in respect of interactions with citizens. And so let me just say this, my final couple of words. Again, I want to go back to how I started this. I started this debate in respect of looking at Matthew Dumas, an 18-year-old boy that was shot and killed. And in my questions, I talked about Craig McDougall, who was also shot and killed by the WPS within mere minutes of coming into contact with the WPS, who was simply holding a phone and was shot and killed. And I end with acknowledging them and acknowledging their families, because, you know, unless you were involved in those cases, nobody really knows about them. You know, they're not talked about in the same way as the Crystal Tammon inquiry. But the shooting deaths of Matthew Dumas and Craig McDougall and Michael, I should look up his name, but he was a 17-year-old boy, Métis boy, who was also within minutes of coming into contact with the WPS, he was tasered. And I don't know if anybody remembers any of this, but this was actually at the time when WPS members actually got tasers, because there was a time, obviously, WPS members didn't carry tasers on them. And I remember being asked by the media, like, what do you think about police officers now carrying tasers? And I said to whoever I did the interview with, I said, you know, Mark my words, I said, somebody is going to die from being tasered incorrectly by the WPS. It was mere months later that this young boy, Michael, who was 17, a Métis boy, came into contact with the WPS and within minutes was tasered to death. You know, and those are just some of the incidents that we've had. You know, when we look at Aisha Hudson, in the span of 3 weeks, I believe it is, less than 3 weeks, there were 3 other Indigenous peoples, 3 other Indigenous citizens who were shot and killed by the WPS. Each of those individuals are deserving of an inquest. Each of those individuals are deserving of a system, a complaints system, are deserving of an IIU that fully investigates and fully, in a comprehensive, unbiased way to ensure that families and citizens get justice when there are these incidents of coming into contact with the WPS. And so, you know, I end my comments by again, lifting up the families of these Manitoba citizens, of these Indigenous peoples that we've lost after coming into contact with the WPS. And I know that for these families, that work and trying to get justice will not and does not end, even to this very moment, still does not end. And so I lift them up today in my comments. Miigwech.
Just on my list, I have the member for Brandon East, I believe, is next to speak. The honourable member for Brandon East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and as always, it is a pleasure to rise in the House and put words on the record when we talk about the future of Manitoba. When we talk about Bill 7 and the Police Services Amendment Act, it gives us a real good opportunity to look into our communities, to work with law enforcement throughout our communities, whether it be a city police force, whether it be the RCMP in rural Manitoba. There are plenty of examples, Madam Speaker, that I could stand here and talk about. And I say that because I was very fortunate in my career prior to politics in working in safety security in healthcare. And going back, I'm going to say probably 30 years, I had the opportunity to go on a ride-along with the Brandon Police Service. And you really get to see what they go through on a daily basis. I can honestly say that nowadays, it is more severe what the police have to deal with out in public. And we look at what some of the ideas of the bill will do when police officers need that backing, when they need to know that they're doing their job to the best of their ability, that they're doing their job the way they were trained, that they have backing of their fellow police officers, they have backing of the community, and when things go awry, they have the backing of their education. And we look at some of the amendments that happen with investigations that happen within the organization, within the police bill itself. There are many opportunities to learn, to grow. And again, when I was on that ride along, Madam Speaker, and it was the dead of winter, it was November, it was cold, it was snowing, and I chose, when I filled out an application to go on the ride along so I could really get a better understanding, I chose a night shift on a weekend. And let me tell you, Madam Speaker, it was an eye-opener. So everybody's well aware when things happened at the RHA, as the regional director or regional manager for security, I worked really close with the police, and both the RCMP and the Brandon City Police. So to actually go on a ride-along with the Brandon Police Service and be in the vehicle, be outside the vehicle when they were dealing with issues, it gave them a better opportunity to say, here's another set of eyes on what we're doing. One incident, Madam Speakers, we were coming down on 6th Street And in Brandon, when you get to the bottom of 6th Street and Patricia Avenue, or Pacific Avenue, you could look to the left at the time and you could see the bridge.
Order, please. When this matter is again before the House, the honourable member will have 27 minutes remaining. The hour being 5 p.m., this House is adjourned and stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.